1546. And you probably think that in Rome these things are unimportant. No, they are important. So, thank you for coming here. I will be the first to speak, followed by the lady here from the Nato Defense College. And then after that, we have a video, because if you look at the program, we had a director from operations headquarters, NATO Brussels. She could not come, so she sent us a video. You know, you have to go to be happy with that. After saying that, I say again, welcome, buon pomeriggio a tutti. The Foundation works on this region since a decade, and we continue doing this because it is very close to our interests and our values. And of course, I'm speaking of Southeastern Europe, this large area that spans from the Adriatic Sea to the Black Sea. We consider that the region should become part of the euro-atlantic community, and the invasion of Ukraine has given a new sense of urgency. NATO is still upholding the open door policy, and the European Union is active in implementing a policy of inclusion that has strong roots. While war and violence still rage in Ukraine, outside the limelight of major media, a crisis is brewing in the Balkans. For instance, Serbia and Kosovo are still locked in antagonism, and Bosnia-Herzegovina is threatened by secessionist challenges. This is a good reason, I think, to accompany the nations of the area and their people from fragmentation to inclusion, from instability to long-term security, good government, and an accomplished rule of law. The region is complex, as we all know, for different reasons, due to its history, local nationalism, fragile economies, embattled democracies, and other things that you know. I don't have to be too long on this. Looking at positive things, I would like to underline that in the Balkans, the EU-NATO strategic partnership, that it exists, I tell you, it's not only me saying this, has proven its importance, each in line with their respective added values and working in the same direction. This direction is the final objective of full inclusion. NATO remains in Kosovo with the KFOR operation, keeping the same aim proven over 24 years of security projection. We shall not forget the region is subject to internal strife and external malign influence, Russia being an actor in this respect. Ladies and gentlemen, today the Foundation is addressing a number of issues that are relevant but are not often at the center of the international discussion. Our tradition is to promote a friendly conversation aimed at finding good common solutions. As usual, we wish to promote an informed debate at a scientific level, I underline that, in a spirit of respect, I also underline that, encouraged by the recognition that the region has an international priority, a recognized one. We prefer, as usual, voices coming from the region itself, because they are the main actors and nobody can substitute them. As I said, we focus on Southeastern Europe since a long time. We publish a monthly dedicated journal in English, and this is already the 10th conference on the region and its perspective. You see in the program that we are touching upon a number of crucial issues of general relevance under the catchword of resilience, to accompany the aspirations to reform and the final inclusion into the European and Euro-Atlantic institutions. I welcome a large number of speakers and moderators of the highest quality and recognized experience here today. Some of them are also long-time good friends, and we continue to work together. I wish to thank them warmly for having accepted our invitation here in Rome, and I remain convinced that this is a natural and privileged place for a serious conversation about this part of Europe. I conclude thanking the entire staff of the Foundation for their good work and their juvenile enthusiasm. and all those who supported us for this event. Buon pomeriggio a tutti e buon lavoro.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the NATO Foundation, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to represent the NDC this afternoon and to address you. Our two institutions share the same mission: to better understand the world around us and to anticipate major strategic challenges. Allow me to open this conference with a simple conviction. There are no longer any peripheries to European securities. Today you have chosen to discuss a topic that I believe lies at the very heart of the security and prosperity of our continent. The Western Balkans and the Black Sea are no longer marginal areas, but true security challenges for the euro-atlantic stability. In the Western Balkans, we are witnessing a resurgence of political and identity tensions. Renewed secessionist threats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, persistent political instability in Serbia, and the stalemate between Belgrade and Pristina over Kosovo are alarming signs of weakened institutions, democratic fatigue, and structural vulnerability. These internal fragilities, amplified by hybrid threats, targeted misinformation, corruption, and organized crime, undermine citizen trust and create fertile ground for external interference. Looking further east, Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine has highlighted the strategic importance of the Black Sea for Euro-Atlantic security, Europe's energy security, and even global food security. This conflict has also reminded us that the region remains a vital crossroads connecting Europe, Central Asia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Today, with nearly half of the Black Sea littoral states belonging to the Alliance, these developments illustrate a fundamental principle. Dynamics once thought peripheral are now at the core of the geopolitical competition between Russia and the West, and their evolution directly affects the security of the entire European continent. It is therefore unsurprising to see the European Union and NATO reaffirm the central role of the Western Balkans and the Black Sea in their strategic vision, and to revive enlargement dynamics that reflect the awareness of the need to keep this country linked to the Western camp at a time where hybrid threats, internal fractures, and external interferences intersect. Ladies and gentlemen, the stability of the Western Balkans and the Black Sea is not a regional issue. It is a global challenge for Euro-Atlantic security. It tests our unity, resilience, and collective determination. Preserving this space means defending freedom of navigation, state sovereignty, and peace on the continent, as well as protecting our shared values: democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. It is in this spirit that European partners act to strengthen regional cohesion, support EU and NATO accession processes, and assist littoral countries in their institutional and military modernization. Preserving this space is, in essence, defending the founding values of NATO. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my distinct pleasure to deliver opening remarks to you today. My name is Charlotte Hallengren, and I'm the Director for Operations at NATO headquarters in Brussels. I deeply appreciate an opportunity to share some insights with you on NATO's engagement in the Western Balkans and give you a sense of our strategic perspective in the region. My apologies for not being present today, as my schedule wouldn't allow me to travel and join you in person. My sincere gratitude to the Nato Defense College Foundation for organizing this high-level conference, the topic of which could not possibly be timelier. The Western Balkans remains high on NATO's agenda. It is of strategic importance to the alliance, as the secure Western Balkans means greater security across the whole Euro-Atlantic area. The region has come a long way since the 1990s, from a democratic transformation to ongoing processes that are moving it closer to NATO and to the European Union. Our number one priority in the Western Balkans is peace and stability. NATO has supported this for the past 30 years, thus allowing for and enabling important economic and social development. Yet today, we observe concerning trends that persist in the region and that require NATO's constant operational engagement, especially in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Divisive rhetoric, political stagnation, or any opportunities for a security vacuum have significant potential to spoil the progress that we've achieved thus far. NATO's commitment remains steadfast as we continue to implement our part of the two United Nations Security Council resolutions, UNSCR 1244 of 1999 with the NATO-led KFOR mission, and UNSCR 1575 of 2004 through a NATO presence providing operational support to EU-led mission EUFOR Althea. Alongside our direct operational commitments to the safe and secure environments of Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina, NATO also empowers local security institutions to take ownership of their own security through assistance, advice, and capacity-building activities. I'll now give you a brief overview of those efforts. In Kosovo, NATO's commitment is spearheaded by KFOR, which is our longest and currently largest mission. For over 2 decades, KFOR has maintained a safe and secure environment for all people in Kosovo and freedom of movement, in accordance with the UN mandate, which it continues to fulfill impartially and at all times. In these 26 years, we've made great strides. From entering Kosovo in 1999 with 50,000 troops, we are now at 4,600. This reflects an enormous improvement of the security situation, yet challenges persist. The uptick in violence in 2023, both the attacks in Banjska and Zvečan, highlight the fragility of the security situation in Kosovo. KFOR aims to ensure such attacks do not happen again. However, security cannot be left to chance, but must be actively and prudently protected. KFOR troops demonstrated this in Zvečan on 29 May 2023, where their presence was crucial in preventing loss of life. Tragically, it resulted in 93 KFOR soldiers being injured, some of them with life-altering injuries. As Assistant Secretary General Goffis had said time and time again, we at NATO feel this deeply and personally. NATO made it clear to Belgrade and Pristina that such violence must not happen again, and that it was paramount for both sides to refrain from uncoordinated actions. Today, even in the face of a more demanding situation on the ground, NATO is proactively ensuring that KFOR has all the capabilities it needs to fulfill its UN mandate impartially and at all times. Regrettably, KFOR is actively targeted by disinformation and coercive anti-Western narratives, which are not merely false, but dangerous to our troops. This is why the importance of transparency and good faith can hardly be overestimated, especially in times of crisis and when tensions are mounting. Elsewhere in the region, calls for secession and redrawing borders remains a disruptive and disturbing part of the political discourse. This retrograde thinking is dangerous, divisive, and irresponsible. NATO strongly supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. NATO allies are clear that we will not allow a security vacuum to emerge in Bosnia and Herzegovina or elsewhere in the Western Balkans. NATO's contribution to the EU-led Operation EUFOR Althea under the Berlin Plus arrangement exemplifies our commitment. We are expecting all actors to remain responsible and for the UN Security Council members to renew the mandate of EUFOR Althea for another year on 31 October. Finally, to support long-term stability, NATO is investing greatly into building the capacity of local security institutions in the Western Balkans. That is the ownership pillar, the cornerstone of lasting transformational change. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, we support reform efforts to make the country more resilient and secure, including through a defense capacity building package. This effort strengthens their capabilities in areas including crisis management, cyber defense, and counterterrorism, and enhances the interoperability of Bosnia and Herzegovina's armed forces with NATO's. This year, we expect to launch programs of activities in a number of domains, including counterterrorism, cyber defense, air evacuation, military police, and crisis management. Important steps have already been undertaken. More than 8 million euros have been contributed to the dedicated trust fund by NATO allies and partners. In Kosovo, the NATO Advisory and Liaison Team for decades has been providing capacity-building support to the security organizations in Kosovo within the areas of crisis response, response to natural and other disasters and emergencies, explosive ordnance disposal, and civil protection. NATO's goal is to support Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina to develop modern, transparent, and accountable security institutions, focusing on civilian oversight and democratic control of the security forces. Those efforts are long-term investments. They will have long-term benefits, too. We cannot afford to lose sight of those amidst crisis, nor leave gaps that would spoil any future reforms. The people in the Western Balkans deserve to live in peace and to freely decide their own future. This is the vision that NATO has supported and will continue to support. Let me be clear. The alliance and our partners will stay fully engaged in the Western Balkans to support regional stability. We are prepared to adapt, to respond, and to reinforce our presence as necessary. But ultimately, lasting peace will come not from our troops on the ground, but from courageous and constructive political solutions. Our skill set is security, yet the region requires so much more. That is why NATO continues to fully support the normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina, led by the European Union. This is the only way to solve pending issues and secure a stable future, ensuring that the rights of all communities are respected and safeguarded. To move the dialogue forward, both sides must show flexibility, make the necessary compromises, and focus on the long-term gains. I thank you for your time and for the opportunity to address you today, and I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Hello to everybody. We thought that it will be a short introduction, but nonetheless, we will introduce ourselves. Please, Mr. Wild, maybe
we'll do that. Okay.
Okay, it's an immense pleasure to be here today at the start of the Balkans Black Sea Perspective Conference and to talk about important subject of the significance of Dayton Accords. My name is Milica Marinović. I'm media advisor to the President of Montenegro. And today, our distinguished guest is a Swedish politician, diplomat, former Prime Minister of Sweden, Minister of Foreign Affairs. In the time of the Bosnia peace process, EU representative for former Yugoslavia. Then in 1995, first High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today, an active voice about European stability, about Euro-Atlantic relations, Western Balkans. Mr. Carl Bildt, did I forget something? No, well, definitely not a short statement for a really rich and long political career. Maybe we should start in order to keep with the time. So when you think about 1995, what is your first thought and memory? You know, I was a student of international relations, and Dayton Peace Accords was the question in my exams, and I was always wondering how it was politically and personally to bring three leaders together to sign that agreement and, you know, to end the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Well, I mean, first I think we should not forget that even if we focus now on Bosnia, the Bosnian drama was a part of a 10-year drama of the dissolution of Yugoslavia. That went from a rather short skirmish, you can say, with Slovenia, then rolled down in Croatia, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and in North Macedonia. It was 10 years where the efforts of the international community in the beginning was trying to prevent the violent breakup of former Yugoslavia. That failed, has to be said. But in the middle of that, the effort was to prevent the violent breakup of Bosnia, which was, of course, a mini Yugoslavia. And that sort of illustrates the magnitude of the problems that was there. 1995, that's sort of the end phase of the war. But it was also the perhaps second worst year of the war. The worst was in 1992, I think. But 1995 was pretty bad, has to be said. Because that was the fact that there was the realization by all of the actors that the war was coming to an end. And when the war is coming to an end, you do the final battle to be in the best position when the negotiation starts. And that fueled a lot of the military activity and a lot of the ethnic cleansing and all of the horrors that we saw during that particular summer. The important thing that happened in 95 and made peace possible was the fact that for the first time we managed to get all of the major international actors on the same page. The Americans got their act together. They were fairly divided in Washington. There was a division between the Europeans and the Americans. The Russians were somewhat skeptical about some of the things that we were doing. But we managed to get all of them together. And when the international community acts as one, it has force. And that was the diplomatic force that was deployed in order to forge that particular compromise that was Dayton. It has to be said, and that's of course the tragedy of it, that if you look at Dayton, it's not very different from the schemes that were there on the table, the diplomatic schemes that were there on the table before the outbreak of the war. But then the international community was not sufficiently united and not sufficiently determined, so war broke out, and then we had to go back to the drawing board and find the same drawings again and get the peace.
You have some regrets from that time?
Well, no, never regrets. I mean, it doesn't really help. I probably have. What could I have? Yeah, if I think at Dayton, we spent 3 weeks at the U.S. Air Force Base in Ohio. Sounds like strange way of spending 3 weeks, and I can tell you it was. But you see what we did, all of those were there. We spent far more time dividing Bosnia than uniting Bosnia. That sounds odd. Yeah, because nearly, I was at 80% of the effort in Dayton went into drawing maps and having the details of the military implementation. I mean, we had, during the war, we had 20,000 UN forces during the war. In peace, we had 60,000 forces coming in. Their task was to divide the armies. And as those of you who are here from NATO knows and military planning, military wants to have every single bloody detail. Every single bloody detail needs to be sorted out. So 80% of the energy in Dayton was spent on dividing the armies, and only 20% on how we should bring the country back together again with economic and political and diplomatic and constitutional things. That was the regret, I think. We Europeans were complaining somewhat, but it didn't always help. But it was a united team.
Looking at the Bosnia and Herzegovina today and what is happening, did the Dayton Accords fulfilled its purpose? Do you still think that they
It
are a framework for a functional and stable Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, I mean, I would not have recommended that constitution to Sweden. But Sweden didn't have a civil war, and Sweden is not a sort of... I sometimes make... But it's a very complicated structure, the constitution of Bosnia. But I say that if you take a spectrum in Europe, you have, on the one hand, a complete failure is Cyprus. Because the Cyprus constitutional settlement has broken down completely. There's nothing. And we have UN forces patrolling a dead zone in the middle of the capital of the European Union city. That's a complete failure. On the other end, you can say we have Belgium, which is a fairly complicated thing. I mean, every time we have to ratify an agreement in the European Union, it has to go through 6 different parliamentary bodies in Belgium. If you are, for example, those of you who are in Brussels now and see the mess on Place Schumann, which is due to the fact that they can't set up a government in Brussels. It's like Mostar. But Belgium works because it has somewhat stronger institution. It has social insurance on the federal level, and that helps. Bosnia is somewhere in between. It sort of works, but could work better. And had I wished something, it would have been for the politicians of Bosnia during those 30 years to come together and improve the framework of Dayton. But they've not been able to agree on that.
When you're talking about it, since you were the first High Representative, talking about your successor today, Mr. Schmidt, and also how do you assess his actions in the recent months, and also the actions of political leaders in Federation and Republika Srpska?
I have as one of my principles in life that I never assess any of my successors in whatever positions I've had, because that tends to be that it was better before. It wasn't. So I'm not assessing him. Assessing the politicians of Bosnia, I would have to be rather critical. Because after the war, when we closed down the war, we spent a huge amount of money. I mean, if you go to Sarajevo today, you don't see any sign of the war whatsoever. I mean, I can go and find something because I know where to see it, but otherwise you don't. Huge amount of money in rebuilding the country. But the politicians often saw peace as the continuation of war by other means. And that means that they go back to, whenever there's an election, they tend to go back to the nationalist rhetoric and say, those are the bad ones, vote for us to protect us against the other bad ones. So politics have been fairly divisive in the country, which has been to the detriment of the country. But it has to be said, I go back to Bosnia virtually every year, avoid Sarajevo as much as I wouldn't say that, but I mean other places in the country, so to see the real country. I mean, there's been less inter-ethnic violence in Bosnia than in Sweden during the last 30 years. No violence. What we spent a lot of time on in the beginning was, as I say, the division of the country, what's called the inter-entity boundary line. We have tanks and troops and whatever to prevent clashes and whatever. Today, I mean, Peter and myself, we know exactly where the IEBL was. We know when we pass it. But if you don't know it, you don't know it. You don't see it. You can see a sign somewhere. But otherwise, people interact. There's virtually no tension between people. There's tension between the politicians, but virtually no tension between people. Does that mean that they all love each other? No, people seldom do. They don't do that in politics of Sweden either, I have to confess, although it's not quite as bad. But they know there was a war. A war is a bad thing. And now they're building a peace. The thing that worries me, if there's one thing that worries me, not only Bosnia, but generally in the Balkans, is of course that young people are leaving. Bosnia used to be 4.5 million people. It's now 3.5 or something like that. And they queue up outside the German embassy to get permission to work in Germany. It's sorry to say, virtually the same all across the Balkans. But still, I think that's really the thing that needs to be done, to give sort of confidence in the future of the country to young people, so that they stay and invest in the future of their country, because it has assets. It has resources. It has possibilities.
When we were talking about Western Balkans, things have changed profoundly since the 1990s. You have
Yep.
some countries which are the members of the NATO alliance, others are part of the EU, some are on the path, some are neutral. But how do you see, the Western Balkans 30 years after? Did the politicians learn something about the Dayton?
Well, I think after Dayton, there was some of us were then trying to say that we need to have a push for sort of European integration and things like that. Not very much came of that. Then we got the Kosovo War, and after the Kosovo War, there was a renewed push for that, the stabilization and what we call the stabilization agreement of force or whatever it was called at the time. Not very much came of that either, has to be said. Croatia became a member of the European Union in 2013, but since then, until recently I'd say, the Brussels machinery has paid lip service to enlargement, but not very much more than that. And that has been bad, because that means that the impetus of enlargement has been sort of the driving force, the soft power has been weakened. It's slightly different in different parts of the country and different parts of the Balkans, but we should have done more in terms of driving integration and driving reform. Because without that drive from Brussels, it doesn't happen.
Today you have often different voices from the European capitals.
Yes.
You have a number of candidates. The country where I come from, Montenegro, is also one of them. Bosnia and Herzegovina, whom we spoke about, is also a country which is candidate. Our motto and our credo in Montenegro is 28 by 28. Is this possible? Do you see enlargement in the next years happening, especially when we have in mind global shifting power circumstances?
Yes, but the global shift has, as a matter of fact, helped the Western Balkans in this particular case, because I mean the thing that brought enlargement back is Ukraine. It was fairly obvious, and I sort of vividly remember the significant shift in primarily the French position. The French had been essentially against Western Balkan enlargement, essentially couldn't think about Ukraine. But then came the war, and the French turned around. And when they turned around on Ukraine and on Moldova, then you have to turn around on the Western Balkans as well. So the fact that Ukraine is now on the agenda, the strategic imperative of that in order to create stability in the east of Europe, has brought the Western Balkans back on the agenda. And then we are sort of back on all the minute details of what they are doing or not doing. I mean, Albania and Montenegro are probably in the lead, but we still have major problems. I mean, we have the ludicrous situation where North Macedonia is still blocked by the Bulgarians for reasons that you have to have a fairly high degree in history in order to understand it. And we have, of course, the fact that the Serbia-Kosovo war ended out without the peace agreement. So we still have a situation where Kosovo is not recognized by 5 members of the UN, is only recognized by roughly half of the members of the UN. And that creates significant difficulties for the entire process, including Serbia, but Kosovo as well.
When you're speaking about war in Ukraine, let me get back to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which was held in May in Dayton. They, since marking the 30 years of the Dayton Agreement, they urged a deeper engagement of the NATO, warning that the peace in the Western Balkans remains fragile. Is this a serious concern now?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily fragile. I'm not that worried about Bosnia. Well, I'm worried about the aspect of Bosnia that I mentioned. Young people leaving, not sufficient emphasis on the economy, the politicians not getting their act together, although they've been slightly better the last few weeks, I have to say. They've taken some significant steps that were somewhat unexpected. But in terms of sort of fracturing or secession, I think those fears are not there. It has to be noted, by the way, that here the Russians have been somewhat helpful. I mean, whenever Dodik goes to Russia, I don't know if you saw that when he was over there a couple of weeks ago. We saw Lavrov. There was a press conference, and the Russians are very, very. They put a big Bosnian flag behind him, and in order to say that we might disagree with a lot of what the High Representative does, and we think that NATO is a bad thing, and blah blah blah, but the territorial integrity of Bosnia is still something that they support, and that's important. That is important, closing down the secessionist. I'm worried about northern Kosovo and the inability to move forward on, as a matter of fact, the agreements that were made on some of the things in Kosovo, also for the Serb minority. I mean, there were agreements made, but the inability to move forward on implementing those creates difficulties. And I'm worried about, as I said, the hold-up with North Macedonia. Then I can be worried about a lot of details about sort of Montenegrins, Albanians, or Bosnians don't implement the one or the other directive coming out of Brussels on food safety or pig wealth or whatever else Brussels, but that's not a key thing.
So except the north of Kosovo, as you said, what are the most pressing risks for the rest of the region?
No, it depends on what you mean by risk. The overall risk is stagnation, that they don't manage to break out in terms of enlargement, in terms of economic development. It's not that they're doing that badly, has to be said. I mean, the Bosnian economy is plus 2 point something. Serbia has been doing, I mean, if I remember the figures, they are, if we compare the key countries now with the EU average, I think Bosnia is roughly, in terms of GDP per capita, I think Bosnia is roughly a third of EU GDP per capita. That's bad. Serbia is roughly 55%. Croatia is roughly 75%. So there are, Kosovo, I don't know. Kosovo would be below Bosnia, I guess. So there are these divergences that must be overcome, and they can only be overcome by economic integration. And economic integration can be furthered by European integration, but can also be significantly complicated by political flare-ups. Northern Kosovo, to take just one example, which is the most obvious one. I mean, that's really the only one where I can see that I see be a security threat. I can see smallish things in Bosnia if I really spend some time finding something, but nothing that would make me awake at night.
Have in mind everything that you said, and since our time is running, what is that one piece of advice that you would give to Balkan leaders at this particular moment?
Concentrate on economic development. If you don't get the economies moving, you will lose your young people. And then you will be left with a situation that will be very difficult. You get a lot of old people there, but you have to pay for them. And you don't have the vitality of the societies. And you can only get that going by being more serious with the EU enlargement process. That, I think, stagnation, because of the risk of attention, lack of attention on economic development, is probably the biggest long-term risk of the region.
If you had a chance now, I have still time, if you had a chance now to rewrite some Dayton Agreement 2.0, what would you change?
Oh, I think I spent a lot of time in Dayton trying to get them to abstain from the stupid arrangement that they have for the governance of Bosnia, where they have the three-person presidency, and then the person who could not be called prime minister, but is chairman of the Council of Ministers. And this was, of course, because, I mean, it was Alija Izetbegović couldn't tolerate the thought of Haris Selagić being prime minister, so block the possibility of prime minister. And then they were all coming from the Yugoslav constitutional tradition. And Yugoslavia was run by these presidencies with rotating people all the time. So it started with, I think, they wanted a rotating presidency of 7 people or whatever it was, and we said, this is ludicrous, you can't run a country with a presidency of 7 people rotating simply doesn't work. It doesn't work in Yugoslavia, by the way, at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, we managed to negotiate them down to 3, which was bad enough, in my opinion. But that is the aspect of the governance that we failed to break their Yugoslav mindset. And at the end of the day, we had to say, it is their country. It is not our country. And if they fought to forward their country according to the constitutional principles and traditions that they have, who are we to come from California or Sweden or Bavaria and dictate something else to them?
Mr. Bill, thank you very much for your insight and thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have enough voice. Just a second, so I have the pleasure to introduce the next panel. Is it there? No, because before there wasn't. Here we are. I have the pleasure to introduce the next panel on NATO strategy in the Western Balkans, achievements and existing challenges, which means very simple, you know, what we have done until now and what has to be done. Part of it, as you have seen, has been sketched in the before interview, but we have 4 excellent panelists, and I give you to them. Thank you.
We're actually just going to take a second and introduce ourselves to each other, if you don't mind. I think that's appropriate, so I can introduce them to you. Good afternoon, everyone. Don't you love these bar stools? There should be a cocktail sitting here, I think. My name is Laura Jakes. I'm a foreign correspondent for the New York Times, based here in Rome. I was moved here 3 years ago after covering the State Department and the Pentagon in Washington for many, many years. My assignment here was to start covering NATO support to Ukraine, which has broadened into deterrence, military deterrence, more European-wide. So you can imagine my response, or my surprise over the summer when I was talking to a general from a NATO state here in Europe, and I wanted to talk about Russia and Ukraine, and he turned the conversation very quickly to the Western Balkans, volunteered to do that. And he told me that the world should be paying more attention to the Western Balkans because tensions, he said, were running so high that it was going to again become the proverbial powder keg that we had been hearing about for the last 30 years. Again, I know that's a term we've heard for a long time, and after listening to Mr. Bildt, I wonder if that's a little alarmist, but this is what this particular general said at the time. And I assume that's mostly because Milorad Dodik was still in power, and this general was very concerned about his efforts to undermine the Dayton Accords and the High Representative's efforts to enforce it. But of course, it did get me thinking about how the West spotlight has swung away from this region. It was a horrible, obviously, thing that happened on Europe's doorstep in Europe. And then we, as an alliance, got distracted by 9/11. And now, of course, we have the invasions of Ukraine starting in 2014, and then again with the full-scale invasion 3 years ago. And I just find that so striking, and clearly this general did as well, considering how strategically important the Western Balkans are to Europe. And just as an example, the Western Balkans did not merit even a mention in the communique at the NATO Leader Summit this June in The Hague. EU accession talks are still going on, as they have been for years. We know Russia has always been a driver of instability through its influence in Serbia and Republika Srpska. And it is still leveraging energy dominance and political patronage there and seeding disinformation across the rest of the region. Meanwhile, as I'm sure we all know, China is funding at least hundreds of infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing projects in the Balkans. About a year ago, the tally was that they had invested about 32 billion euros in the region. About a third of that was to Serbia. And of course, we can't forget the massive cyber attack by Iran and some of its agents in Albania that obviously sought to sow distrust in financial institutions and undermine the government. As one analyst put it, a fragmented Western Balkans weakens the broader European order and undermines transatlantic security objectives. So, today we have three experts who will guide us through the region's challenges and how to counter them. Zeynep Alemdar, sorry, the Director of Foreign Policy Program at EDAM in Istanbul. Peter Sorensen. Sorry, I'm going to jump around here just to keep everybody on their toes. Peter Sorensen is the EU Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina Dialogue and Western Balkans regional issues. Big breath after that title. It's a long one. For the EEAS, which is the foreign policy arm of the EU in Brussels. And Vessela Tcherneva, the Deputy Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations in Sofia. Placed in Sofia?
The European Council on Foreign Relations is based in many places, but yes, based in Sofia.
Sure, understood. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to give some introductory comments, and then I will have some incisive questions, obviously, to ask of all three of them, and then I will be opening it up to the rest of you to ask questions. I'm sure you came prepared, and I'm sure, honestly, your questions would be much more interesting and insightful than mine. So, Zeynep, why don't you start us, please?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So what I was told to do was to talk about the evolving role of NATO post-Trump 2.0 and its impact on the Balkans. So I would try to basically draw a frame about how Trump's effect on NATO actually is actually enrolling. One of the things I think we all know what he did. We all know what Marco Rubio said. But last month, during his speech at or this month actually, during his speech at the UN, he said that the U.S. champions sovereignty and rejects globalism in front of the 192 members of the UN. So I think one of the things that we should be very careful upon and really remember all the time is that not only US's credibility as a stabilizer, both in the Western Balkans and the world, has shrinked or like completely eroded, but the institutions are also weakening. So the belief in not only belief in the institutions are also weakening, but also the divergences within the institutions are weakening. What we academics call usually is thinning of the institutions. Yet the more important part is this, that multipolarity was already in the cards since the end of the Cold War, but what Trump's move has done is that he highlighted the significant divisions in the post-World War II order. So, and encouraged alternative power centers. So not only Russia and China, but middle powers are also regrouping under various institutions. Moreover, Trump also disregards multilateral diplomacy, and he prefers leader-to-leader, bilateral relations. And this actually sidelines formal frameworks for conflict resolution, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now. And NATO leaders, as our video speaker also made very clear, are aware of this. In March 2025, Mark Rutte visited Sarajevo. He said, NATO's firm commitment to the stability of this region and to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of Bosnia-Herzegovina is intact. He also mentioned the Dayton peace accords and how they are still the cornerstone. Then we had the Parliamentary Assembly report in September 2025 that underlined that Western Balkans is increasingly vulnerable to malign external influence. They were talking about Russia, they were talking about China, but also there was a lot of debt sustainability concerns, there were a lot of long-term governance concerns. So I think these are the types of the things that we should be probably thinking more about in the coming years. One of the things that I would thus advise or suggest that we would start thinking about very soon would be two things. One of them is these hybrid threats definition of the NATO. Which actually Rutte is also kind of thinking about nowadays. What does really hybrid threat mean? Where does it really start? When you say something, when you define something as hybrid, it's you can basically put everything in there. So is this going to be some type of political influence or something else? So we should probably think about that. And the second is, and this is also in the strategic concept, we kind of had it kind of mainstreamed it in the NATO strategic concept in 2022, but we don't see enough, I think, comments or prominence of the economic security risks, which also you were advising to Bosnia as well. So I think one of the things, I think the things that we can definitely do will be to think about these things in a much in a much more concentrated way, and try to solve the tensions that are already going on, the ethnic tensions, the territorial disputes, the geopolitical polarization, the external pressures, the influence operations, the disinformation, propaganda, all the threats, the military build-up and different types of alignments between various countries. So I think what I will mostly focus on will be two things. One of them would be this disinformation, because at EDAM we've done a lot of work on disinformation and how NATO and the European External Action Service do not unfortunately talk to each other too much. And they're both working on foreign information manipulation and interference, but they are naming it differently. So I think that is one thing that we should definitely think about, and how to cooperate, how to make EU and basically NATO cooperate on these definitions of disinformation. And the second one is again as you also mentioned, these Chinese investments in Serbia actually equal to all 27 EU countries' investments in Serbia. Russia controls Serbia's energy markets. Bosnia-Herzegovina has 2 refineries which are both owned by the Russians. So, one other thing that we should do is, how to basically increase economic security within the NATO's strategic overview. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Zeynep. Before we move on, I would just like to ask people to silence their cell phones so we don't miss what our panelists are saying. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. Peter Sorensen, could you lead us off with what it looks like from the EEAS?
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this event. As one of Carl's former employees, it's fantastic to be back here and talk about things we really like. And as he alluded to, the region is something that's close to heart. So I have been working with the place since 1995. I have worked in Zagreb. I worked in Sarajevo. I worked in Skopje, I worked in Pristina, and I worked in Belgrade, and then I'm back to Sarajevo. So that has been my trip, and now I was lucky enough to get back to work with the dialogue that's been mentioned before. But I will ask to say a little bit about how to prevent crisis in the way we are working today, and I will take my departure in Operations Director Hellengren's words about the dialogue, because that's one of the few areas in which the military and the civilian comes hand in hand in the region today. But before I do that, let me just say I probably subscribe to the description closer to that of Carl's than that of the general. People are living in the area, but are they using their institutions, or the institution being used to this fullest? Probably not. Where there is a challenge really is on those areas and those things where we haven't found a resolution. And this is where the dialogue comes in. Because what happened was, allow me for 2 seconds on history. 1999, NATO bombed Serbia, and the UN administration in Kosovo installed. United Nations took over the administrative responsibility for the territory. The jurisdiction was established at Kosovo, and UN governed the place. Fast forward 2008, Kosovo declares independence, challenged by Serbia. Serbia has an intermezzo that goes over the International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice in 2010 comes out and says that the declaration of independence is not illegal from a international law point of view. And then the General Assembly invites the European Union to facilitate a dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade. Pause a second for that. We had 50,000, as we heard from the introduction, we had 50,000 soldiers in Kosovo and 8,000 policemen over the years. And 2011, 12 years later, we invite the parties to sit down and talk to each other and find the solutions. And that is the context in which the dialogue was born. Since then, 90 agreements has been made about practical things of running border boundary, and I say that's because some has recognized, some has not, depending on where you come from. Arranging practical arrangements, such as getting what was before and during the UN reign was Serbian municipalities, suddenly were municipalities that was run inside the Kosovo system. We transformed the police from a Serbian police into a Kosovo police. They transformed the judiciary from Serbian into Kosovo, and so on and so forth. These 90 agreements basically focused on making life for people living there as normal as could be, while not touching the issue about status and so on and so forth. And mind you, these things were happened by agreements, not by force. UNMIK couldn't do it with military. The parties did it themselves by talking. But one thing that's very clear is these things take time, and the political reality needs to be there. It was not a Dayton exercise where you brought everybody to an army base. It is an exercise that happens in a normal political environment where the political realities of the two sides needs to fit as well. So where the issue of the military creating the safe and secure environment is supported by a political reality with a process that moves forward, this is where you see the dialogue today. And it has been a success insofar that there has been things going on and has been agreed which we never thought we could do. Now, to the point that was made early on, that we have the northern part of Kosovo that is concerning, it concerns a lot. We had elections yesterday and everybody participated. Now we wait till 1st of November to see if the mayors are installed again. If that happens, we are back on track with running a Kosovo as it was agreed by the parties. I'm going through this to say these things takes time when it's not a peace agreement as such, and this is what we have been doing. But it cannot be done unless we are working side by side, and as Hallengren rightly so said, that we are trying to make sure that when we are moving these things forwards, we do it hand in hand, and that's what we have seen with between the NATO mission there and my own setup. I think I'll stop there.
I actually have a follow-up question. If you could just clarify, since you're going through the history of this, if you could clarify something for me. In 2023, there was an agreement in principle in the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. I thought that was for normalization, but I also thought that nothing had happened since then. Could you clarify what the status of that is and why it hasn't, if I'm understanding this correctly, why it hasn't moved forward?
Yes. Are we on? Yeah. So what has happened through the 90 agreements that I mentioned before has been a succession of agreements from 2013, 15, 16, and the biggest agreement came in 2023. What happened there was that whereas the first agreement focused very much on technical, get the boundaries to work, get the administration to work and so on, the agreement in 23 was basically codifying all the agreements that's been beforehand into one big agreement called the Ohrid Agreement. What happened then was a discussion between the parties who moves first, because inside the 2023 agreement, which is basically drafted and crafted over the principles of the German-German agreement, accept each other's presence but don't formally recognize. Inside that agreement, there are some wishes of both sides, and of course, both sides wishes the other part to start implementing their part first before they give theirs. This is no new thing in a dialogue. If you look at the agreements that have been done over the years, it takes it's not quick to make an agreement, but the easy part is make the agreement, the difficult part is the implementation. Data shows that as well. So the traditional, we will have an agreement entered into, and then it will take 1-2 years to implement it. So only after 2 years you could start seeing the implementation happening. The one that takes the longest part has been such a practical economic thing about how to pay for your electricity if you live in the north and how electricity systems should work. It took 9 years from we started to the agreement was in place. Now, with that in mind, I'm not so concerned about the 2023 agreement, because it does have a lot of elements and it will take, my guess, it will take some years before we end up with, we can say that this has been agreed. But the difference with the 23 agreement compared to the other more practical, technical ones is this one is super political as well, because it includes live and let live, the live and live part that was in the German as well, and that will take time to implement. It requires Belgrade accepting that Kosovo becomes member of international organizations. It requires that Pristina accepts that a methodology is found that will allow for certain majority municipalities that they somehow can cooperate and work together. It will require that Belgrade accept symbols and things like Pristina is using. I imagine that has to be from a country that doesn't recognize Pristina as an existence. So therefore, it will take time. So the agreement is in place, and now we are quietly mulling through, plowing through, finding ways to do the implementation. It takes the problem that the challenge we have is that every time we meet and people know that we meet, there's an expectation that we have results, and we don't. It doesn't work like that. It takes a lot of time. So this is basically where it is. So hence all the academics and those who doesn't sit with fingers right into it, they will say nothing is happening, but it is.
Yeah, I would just comment that results are what spur resources, right? I mean, that's where you get more buy-in from your countries to continue supporting this process. And Vessela, just give me one more second with Peter, because I want to push on you on this. Is there a deadline for ratification of the 2023 agreement?
There isn't a hard deadline written on paper, but I believe myself there is a deadline out there that, and that goes for any international agreement, diplomatic arrangement. If you agree and you don't get it implemented, it dies discutono. So I believe that in the coming year, 1-2 years, we need to start seeing movement on implementation. The time that has been spent now in disagreeing of what not to agree on, fine, that is acceptable in this line of business, but there has to be, within the next year or two, there has to be some movement on these issues.
Thank you. And Vessela, if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the new and old challenges that the Western Balkans are facing.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be here. And speaking after Peter will probably feel simpler and easier because he's obviously explaining a very complicated process that is very difficult to implement. But I mean, having also Carl here, with what he told us about Dayton, this is really a little bit the fate of the Balkans, to be going through processes that to some may look like going in circles, and in the last couple of decades, and I say that because Carl may be Peter's former boss, but he's kind of my current boss, being the co-chair of ECFR. But we worked together on something called International Commission on the Balkans 2 decades ago. And back then we were wondering how to win the peace in the Balkans, not only how to stop the war, which was obviously the big result of Dayton and the other subsequent agreements. But winning the peace has proven to be still, you know, a convoluted game. And as it was said, it's not that the Balkans are going to explode tomorrow. The story there is really about demography, about economic development. It's, by the way, also about democracy and what happens with the democracies in those countries, because the more they get disappointed by their perspectives to join the EU, the less it becomes probable for the reformists in those countries to kind of win the trust of the publics. Also, it's very difficult to do reforms when you don't have allies, and the biggest ally of all the reformers has always been the EU and NATO. If we look at the Western Balkans from a NATO perspective, of course it's a mixed bag. I mean, you cannot talk about the region because 3 of the countries are members of NATO, 3 are not. Some of them are producers, so to say contributors to the security. Others are consumers of security guarantees and security arrangements. We have U4, we have K4. We remember the Banska incident in Kosovo, which was the highlight of the security risk that still the Western Balkans present. But there is, of course, the whole movement within NATO. I mean, everything that has happened in the last year looks like a roller coaster also from a NATO perspective. It started with the French president saying that NATO is brain dead. Then now we have the American president talking about NATO as they. We have a lot of diverging interests vis-a-vis the Russian war in Ukraine. We have the real estate democracy and so on. And yet, in the Western Balkans, NATO's mission seems to be intact, seems to be clear, and it seems to be, as Peter also mentioned, in sync with the EU in its main points. So on the one hand, there is the issue of trust. So how much can countries in the region and societies in the region trust NATO and EU? And on the other hand is how those two cooperate. And I think the fact that there is this blurred horizon in terms of the EU integration has created not only, as you said, space for third actors, China and others, but it also has created space for internal, let's say, bilateral arrangements. I mean, we have seen new, they call them military alliances. These are actually political declarations. On the one hand, Croatia, Albania, and Kosovo wanting to work together, and then immediately Serbia, Hungary, and Republika Srpska also signing some sort of a program for military cooperation. This may not have any substance in terms of real kind of military cooperation, but it does sound a bit, what should I say? It recalls old stories in the region, which makes it kind of not having a really very positive connotation. And last but not least, what Zeynep started by, the hybrid threats in the Balkans, something that we have not been we have not been able to tackle that through the EU, and this is obviously a blind spot, a huge blind spot for the EU. And this has become the name of the game in the region. It is obviously about media, about manipulation of public opinion, but it's also about, training Moldovan interference officers, so to say, in Serbia in order to get the pro-Russian vote in Moldova to prevail. I mean, this is actually a much more complex and complicated set of threats on the societal level that we're discussing. I will not spare you also the elephant in the room, which is the state of the Serbian democracy and what is happening right now on the streets of many Serbian towns. This is in its own right a factor of, let's say, instability, if not societal change, but how do we address that, given especially the hybrid openings that we can see there is also a big question. And to conclude, I think, because the Black Sea was also in the title of this event, I want to say that if there is a bigger role that NATO would play going forward in the Black Sea region, and that most probably is going to be the case, I think the Western Balkans are probably going to resort even more to their EU kind of side of the coin, so to say. That means that the EU has to be much more prepared to tackle all sorts of challenges, including the ones that we just discussed: hybrid, the democracy challenge, and security challenges more broadly.
Thank you. I want to stay with you for a moment. almost a decade ago, you wrote about a, quote, firefighter approach that Europe had taken toward the Western Balkans, which I understood to mean was more of a reaction instead of strategizing on how to work with the Western Balkans and how to help the situation. And I just wonder now, we hear so much from NATO, Mark Rutte says it all the time, that regional leaders need to take the lead to move forward. I think Carl said something about it, or the operations director did as well. Exactly how is that supposed to manifest, do you think? And do the regional leaders have the resources to do something like that?
The firefighting mode of the EU was basically because the EU did not have any ambition at that time to enlarge. I mean, this was quite clear to the region. We saw this changing big time after the beginning of the Ukraine war. We discuss much more the EU being a geopolitical actor, having much more geostrategic considerations, also vis-a-vis the enlargement. I was in Montenegro last week, and the Montenegrin government indeed wants to be finished and in 28. I don't know what here the audience feels is the mood in Rome, but I do not feel huge enthusiasm in the European capitals. And if this is the case, if we miss the opportunity to prove that the enlargement is alive, this is also going to present a big security risk, because then the leaders of the region will be right to turn around and say, you know, you actually don't want us, you don't mean it really, so why should we make the effort? If this is the case, we have to be very careful in calculating what is that we can offer them. Can we offer them some sort of a privileged partnership? What does it mean? Can we offer them a special security arrangement for those who are not in NATO, and so on? But this has to be really thought through, because I think muddling through, like we have been doing this in the last 10 years or more, is just not good enough anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, the muddling through this process. Zeynep, when we think about the evolving role of NATO in this new scenario, you took it to Trump, which I think is right. My first reaction was to the evolving scenario of Ukraine and the priorities that NATO puts on Ukraine versus other issues, and as you have both said, the evolving threat of hybrid is ever growing, and I think NATO and most countries are struggling with how to address this. I'm wondering if you have ever seen, or if you think anything you've seen of some of this disinformation, manipulation of public sentiment rises to an Article 5 violation, and at what point, I know that's a lot to ask of you because this is a huge question that NATO is dealing with right now, but hybrid is something that you brought up. Naming and shaming only goes so far. Is this something that needs to be dealt with only bilaterally, or should NATO take a harder, and the EU, I suppose, take a harder approach to it, especially in a place like the Western Balkans?
I mean, whatever we read or learn about the Western Balkans and interference to elections, it all comes to, at the end of the day, it all comes to, you know, the Russian misinformation channels, and not only misinformation, but as Vessela mentioned, you know, training of, you know, different agents. I think it will be a stretch to go to the, you know, Article 5, but on the other hand, you know, we started going to Article 4 so often that I don't know whether we will need to go to Article 5.
Twice in 2 weeks. That was impressive. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, especially with feedback, but it was quite unprecedented for that to happen.
That's what I'm saying. But No, I think what I mostly try to underline is the fact that, I mean, NATO is a type of organization that actually has always known how to renew itself. You know, it always reinvented itself. It's changed itself. Although it's of course it's a defense corporation, and I was thinking that, you know, oh my God, Zeynep, you're going there and you're going to say that, you know, oh, we should think about economy, which is completely against, you know, everything that NATO mostly stands for. But then I really believe that these questions are not actually separable from each other. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, you know, the Dayton Accords do not work. I mean, that's what happens in Serbian streets. I mean, what happens in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I think one of the reasons why I also linked it to Trump is basically this is the end of the liberal international order, and we are going through it. So international organizations such as NATO, which, I mean, we had the privilege in our lifetime to live safely under for, I mean, I don't know how you define safety, but, you know, still somehow. We have the opportunity to actually renew, you know, our priorities and think about it, because this is something that we are good at. This is something that NATO has done before. That is why I think, like, I'm trying to link all these, you know, international organizations in such a way that we will find, you know, commonalities that will actually benefit all the nations and all the states, and actually help the citizens to live peacefully and not, you know, do it as the Dayton Accords, which, you know, the results we are actually seeing now.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question of Peter, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So if moderators could get their microphones ready to pass around, I'd appreciate it. Peter, I'm curious about how the end of the war in Ukraine might affect the situation between the Serbs and Kosovo. If Russia ends in a position of strength, does this have a knock-on effect in empowering or emboldening the government in Belgrade?
That's a big question. And that I wouldn't know what to answer to, but when you started the question, I already knew that I would say it won't have an impact on the conversation between the two sides that I'm dealing with right now.
Why not?
Because what they're dealing with is they're finding a way through their own situation that they both have claim to the same territory. And you can, of course, by extension say, okay, maybe when there is an end, is there a territorial question there and so on? That's totally, we don't know. So I think at this stage we can't answer that question. But I can more than saying that the diplomatic work we do with Pristina Belgrade, there's enough energy in that in itself that external things, right now I have my doubt, will have an impact. They need to figure out how to resolve this between them. They are halfway in the German model.
Well, we shall see. I hope you're right. Okay, did either one of you want to? Yes, Vessela.
I'm very happy that I'm not in a diplomatic role here.
Folks, that means this is going to be a great answer. Go ahead.
No, I just think that if Russia is to win, we will have a whole different picture in the Western Balkans. And this is quite clear. And it's not, I agree with Peter that on the negotiations of the 23 agreement, it's probably not going to have a direct impact, but it will have an impact on us. It will have an impact on our legitimacy to offer, you know, a future to the Western Balkan countries, because in a way it is about also our ability to protect our way of life. It's about our ability to protect the the principles of the UN Charter. A lot of it is obviously about borders, territories, and in the Balkans this is still a very sensitive topic. And frankly, you know, I think this would be the least of our problems, probably.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I'll start here with you. Just a friendly request. Please ask crisp questions and not chatter on for a bit. And we'll start right here, please.
Thank you. My name is Vessela Tcherneva. I'm an ambassador of North Macedonia here in Italy. I have one question, and I want to zoom out from all the problems that were mentioned by all the panelists, and I'm absolutely, thrilled to hear Carl and Peter and all the rest. And I want to concentrate on one issue that was introduced tonight by Carl Bildt, which is absolutely amazing and fascinating, and we should concentrate more on that. When he was asked about what would be one issue, one suggestion that you might make for all these leaders of Western Balkans, he talked about economic development. So if the economy is the attraction force for the local leaders of Western Balkans, I would ask the same question. What would be the attraction force for all the international players that Carl talked and everybody talked, that US cannot understand each other within NATO, within EU, there is an enlargement or not? What would that one issue, like the economy that Carl talked about, local players, what that one issue, the attraction force of all international leaders would come together? If security is that one issue, it shows, it demonstrates that it passed 3 years after Ukraine war, and still the enlargement is moving away, it's not there. So is there a shocking event, a political event, a military event that needs to happen at large in order for all the international players to have this attraction force, like Carl is talking about the economy, about local leaders at Western Balkans?
Thank you, Ambassador. So what will it take to get the international community refocused on the priority that the Western Balkans is? Peter, do you want to start? We'll just go down the line.
Yeah.
And a gentle reminder to our panelists, crisp answers as well, please.
Okay, we're already there. EU enlargement is, the new Commission has stated very clearly what the ideas are. So I think the penny has dropped for us in that respect. I was sitting in Bosnia when we said there would be no more enlargement in this. It was in 2014 or something like that, and saw what that did. I saw the effect of this, but it's a different situation now. The number of meetings in the process is okay, but I'll keep it crisp and just say we're already there.
I think it's Ukraine. I think depending on how Ukraine does and what the EU thinks about Ukraine in terms of not only the war but enlargement and how it is going to perform the MFF negotiations next year, is going to play a big role in how it thinks about the Western Balkans. Because if in the end the consensus in the EU is that all of this is too hard, too expensive, and it's just going to take too much political energy, that is definitely going to be valid also for the Western Balkans.
I think from the Turkish standpoint, and I don't do this usually because I don't usually talk with the states' policies, but it's I think from the Turkish standpoint, I mean the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister Fidan also just recently said that this is the EU membership for the Western Balkans is the way that is the only way that the Western Balkans are going to be again on the spot. But also he emphasized other types of potential cooperation between Turkey and the Western Balkan countries, for example, about customs union. So I think those types of changes would actually, EU membership for the Western Balkan countries would actually bring somehow, better development to the Balkans.
Peter, am I understanding correctly that there are accession talks underway with Serbia? There are accession talks underway with Serbia. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, hold that thought. Another question. In the back, this gentleman, I saw you. Yeah. Yeah, it's coming.
Good afternoon. My name is Tudo Morgante. I've been working for 21 years in former Yugoslavia, in each republic, doing institution building. So I got some grasp of the situation. I was leading the program of reconstitution of the state institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Among other tasks, in Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia, except for Montenegro, I've done them all. My question is why we Westerners opted for a reconstruction, institutional reconstruction in the Balkans without passing through the creation of constituent assemblies as we've done in Italy, as we have done in Germany in the post-war period. Was it too time-consuming? We have opted to support semi-presidential regimes, governments, forms of government, in a framework which was never very democratic. Is there still room to fix the situation and to undertake action to democratize more the institution building and reconstruction of the institutions in ex-Yugoslavia? Thank you.
Pretty sure that's to you.
No.
No? Okay. So, okay, it'll take a woman to step up here then, so.
There is a big difference among all the six, right? The real presidential, and this is not even by constitution, but it's by practice, that the president in Serbia accumulated so much power. But actually, all of them have very strong parliaments and very strong parliamentary constitutions. This is, by the way, a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's a curse because you constantly have to struggle for majorities in a highly fragmented environment, and in the Balkans, highly fragmented environments are just not good, nice to watch. And they can be also risky. But also it's a blessing because when we look at Serbia, we see how one very centralized center of power can actually be a reason for problems rather than a solution. In most of the other countries, I mean, they do have strong leaders. These are prime ministers, however, they're not presidents. In most other countries, there are strong parliamentary democracies. There was a moment in Albania when they had the opposition was boycotting the parliament, and that was also kind of a period of something like 2 years when you really did not have much parliamentarian life. But I think all in all, This is not, let's say, the issue is more about how you exercise parliamentary democracy rather than about the constitutional setup. Because if you look at Hungary, for instance, it's a country that has a system that should produce legitimate majorities, but you have somebody like Mr. Orban who is not only creating hyper centralized power, but he's also becoming the role model for the Western Balkans.
Would you like to add?
I mean, this is not a direct question, and I think the gentleman who asked the question knows the answer better than most of us, since he's so experienced in this. But I'll just tell a joke about when the Turkish EU accession negotiations were going on. We were actually joking to ourselves. We were like, oh, we wish we were like the Balkans because they didn't have a constitution before, or they didn't really have a democratic background before. So it might actually be easier for them to accede to the EU and get the EU acquis much easier into their constitution. But of course that didn't happen either.
So just to kind of follow up and to come back to this pen that I put in the question, I myself as a journalist, and I think many in the West now do look at so much through the prism of Ukraine and Ukraine's experience. And 2014 with the invasion of Ukraine, the takeover of Crimea, which was started by the Maidan protests, which were a result of Ukraine wanting to turn more Western and wanting to become part of the EU. And so I wonder, is that at all a concern in the Western Balkans, specific to maybe Serbia? Is there a concern that Serbia's efforts to become an EU member might go backwards in the way that it did for Ukraine?
The thing with Serbia is that it started late, but it was actually the country which was always considered as being the one that is going to produce the enlargement for the whole of the region, because it has this very special role for the whole of the Western Balkans, and also because once you have Serbia in, you can also get all others in together with Serbia, including Kosovo, so that Serbia cannot veto any of the others. So there was this logic. Right now it seems that Serbia is not actually progressing on the negotiations. You're right, it's actually backsliding. There is this cluster 3 that Serbia was supposed to open end of last year, which didn't work out. And now there is, you can hear the reverse logic, namely to say that if Montenegro gets in, this will be the moment when it will become clear also for the Serbs that they have a chance, and that may turn around the whole notion of the EU and the ambition of Serbia, because unfortunately currently around 30% of Serbs only support the EU, and this is a very sad result. I mean, this is really not a good basis to really think of Serbia as a candidate country.
Thank you. Okay, I will take these last 2 questions as long as you promise me they are rapid fire questions, okay? So this gentleman in the back first, and then you. We have 1 minute and 15 seconds, so let's see how fast you can go.
I'm Željko Pantelli, Serbian-based journalist in Rome. I have a question for Mr. Sorensen. When your officials in the EU and NATO as well say we have not forgotten Banjska case, What does it mean that Belgrade should prosecute the responsibles for the Banjska case? And second one, very fast, the Turkey in the Balkan and in Kosovo act as ally of the EU or as a rival? Thank you.
Okay. And now,
I'm Christoph from the Embassy of Switzerland. Could you imagine a scenario that after President Trump fixed the Middle East, that he will focus on the Balkans and fix the Balkans, and how could the deal look like there?
That's about the time he gets the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Okay. Who wants to start?
I start on Banjska. The request has been, and they're still out there and will remain there, is that accountability for that event is being done. There has been in the dialogue set up a system whereby that the two jurisdictions can exchange legal information that they need. There's also an agreement that crimes committed in Kosovo are prosecuted in Kosovo. So obviously there stops my answer to your question, because what does that mean? Then we will have to see. But first, the legal information on the case needs to be exchanged, and it's not. So, and the other question. Turkey is the head of K4 mission right now with the commander. The K4 commander is from Turkey. There's your answer.
Now, Trump.
Can I just take this very briefly, because we have been following the US policy towards the Western Balkans very carefully in the past months. Everybody was worried that if Trump comes back, he's going to live again through his ambitions to pacify Kosovo and Serbia, as this happened during his first mandate. It seems that that the Balkans are not really on his radar. Yes, there are some hotels that his son-in-law is procuring and building in Albania and in Serbia. But the fact is that the Western Balkans, I think, appear only as an economic opportunity. There was apparently a meeting in the UN, during the UN General Assembly, with leaders from the Western Balkans, where Ambassador Richard Grenell and Scott Bessent were present. And it was more of a beauty contest about who is going to offer a better opportunity, economic opportunity. And I think this is where this will stay for now. I really hope his ambition is going to turn now to Russia. But
Zeynep, would you like to close us today?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Turkey is the head of the K4, that's for sure. It's the second biggest military in NATO. The other thing about Trump maybe, you know, dealing with the Western Balkans is that I think one of the couple of other players that we should look at within NATO are UK and Turkey and their defense spending and what they are doing in terms of defense cooperation, if we are, you know, to look into the Balkans. Thank you.
All right, could you all please join me in thanking this fantastic panel? We went wide, we went deep, we laughed, I learned a lot. Thanks for all of your questions as well, and I think we have a coffee break now.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. I don't know how you come to my name, actually. So my name is Lana Prlić. I'm 32 years old. I'm coming from Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm the member of the Parliament of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm really sure that I'm not the smartest person in the room, but maybe I'm one of the youngest in the room. So that's what I call my advantage here. So I have some speech written down, but I will start from the back. So we were discussing at the various first panels today about Dayton Peace Agreement. And I would like to give my opinion about Dayton Peace Agreement because I'm living in that Dayton Peace Agreement. So basically, Dayton Peace Agreement brought peace, and I would put the full stop after that. But after living in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the last 32 years, I would like to say that also Dayton Peace Agreement put on Bosnia and Herzegovina a straitjacket. And it's very hard and almost impossible sometimes to look forward and to be optimistic. But my job as a young person who decided to stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina and do politics is to be optimistic. I would also like to say some words about what Mr. Bild said at the very first panel, is that Sarajevo was rebuilt. Of course it is rebuilt. Also the old bridge in Mostar was rebuilt. But when you walk through Mostar for I don't know, 5, 10 or 15 minutes, you can see the ruins. Actually, Quo Vadis Saida, a movie that was filmed 5 years ago, actually was filmed in the city center of Mostar because it looks like war stopped yesterday. Also, we didn't have a civic war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We had aggression and we had a genocide. And even today, 32 and something years after, and 30 years after, a lot of people are looking for the remains of their loved ones in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I hear a lot of words about reconciliation. I would say to who I have to make peace with. I didn't fight with anyone, but there is a lot of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina who needs to hear, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss, I'm sorry for the tragic, I'm sorry for the genocide, and so on and so forth. That's what I did a couple of years ago when my uncle was convicted for the war criminals in the International Court of Justice in Hague. And I had nothing to do with it. But I had the opportunity to say, I'm sorry and I do apologize for the crimes that happened during the war. And I didn't do that because of the political points. I did that because I found that it's my human responsibility to do that. Also, I would like to go back on the topic that you called me for to speak about, and it is about NATO path of Bosnia and Herzegovina. When I was preparing for this panel, I had the opportunity to speak with the head of mission of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the NATO, Vanja Filipović, and also my comrade and my colleague Zukan Heles, who is Ministry of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who are doing and did really good job in the last period. And it shows when right people are on the right positions and where interests of Bosnia and Herzegovina on the way of to NATO and EU are first above every other political or personal interest, that some things can be made. So for me and for us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and when I say for us, I can speak about people that I represent, and I think I do represent not just people but also the youngers who had to stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina and who chose to stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that NATO path and EU path has no alternative. We do not have alternative on that. So I will use this opportunity to say that it's very important to have ALTA and actually U4 forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not just for the reason of not having the vacuum, security vacuum, but also political vacuum. Because we do have influence, we have Russian influence, we have Chinese influence, and we know how that influence is coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's coming through not just Russia, but also Hungary, Serbia, and then to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it goes on the south. On the recent reports of European Union, it says that Albania is the best when we talk about the EU path, and why? Because there is at least Serbian and Russian influence. So we have to actually, someone should talk about elephant in the room. Of course, there is a lot of things that is up on us, and us, when I say not just us as a people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also politicians. of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where, okay, I thought that I'm loud enough. It's up to us to be concrete on some demands of the NATO when it comes to the increasing the percentage of the money that we should put in our military, not just military but also defense, and also the how to recreate and how to modernize our military. Also, I would like to underline that security, and the other day Ministry of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina said that security is not only about military strength but also about building political stability and protecting democratic values. And that's why NATO must be present on the Western Balkans. If not NATO, then the others will be that we are fighting against. And also I would just like to highlight that membership in NATO is not just political goal, because NATO is just not representing the military and the defense, but also the values that we are living and believing in. So, and for the very end, and I have 2.5 minutes, I would like to share also what Radmila Šekerinska said the other day in Sarajevo on the Security Defense Forum, which is one of the greatest events that we have regarding security in Sarajevo. And she said, once destroyed can be rebuilt. So everything can be rebuilt, but also we have to start looking ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, what I can do as a person, as a politician, as an ambassador, as anyone else, to push forward in some good ways. And I think that this conference is one of the ways how we can push forward things that we all care about, and that is security. And why security? Because we know that the fear is one of the strongest emotions of the people, of the person can have. And we know if the person and the people are under the fear, they are easy to be manipulated. And I don't want to manipulate my people. Thank you.
I would like first of all to cordially thank Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo and the Nato Defense College Foundation for keeping a permanent eye on the Balkans and the Black Sea region. Alessandro and I worked together over Bulgaria's membership in NATO 21 years ago when the Big Bang happened. And these were times which nobody knows whether will be repeated in future again. The Balkans and the Black Sea region have significance for the world, mainly when there are a crisis. Today is a day of global hope. I was watching, as probably most of you, CNN today, the speech of President Trump in Jerusalem. And this really creates global hope. Let's see what will happen with this hope. But let's try to invest this hope into the Black Sea and the Balkan region. On the screen you're supposed to see, though it is not the case at this moment, two slides which I have prepared. Yes, this is slide number 1. These are the aggressions of Kremlin. The aggressions of Kremlin after 1917, after the revolution. For 104 years until 2022, there are 52 aggressions, which means that every 2 years there is an aggression. I mean by aggression, military invasion or whatever we see in the news. 52 aggressions for 140 years. Please put the other side in order to see it in a more picturesque form. Yes, this is the case. Angola is missing here because it was difficult to produce the map with Angola. And more or less, all of these aggressions were hybrid aggressions. And that's why I'm planning not to use the term hybrid in my remarks today. Whether it is total, whether it is asymmetric, whether it is unorthodox, unusual, all of them are hybrid. Ukraine is hybrid, World War II was hybrid, the Cold War was hybrid, even the Trojan War with the Trojan horse were hybrid in one way or another. And the hybrid was, or asymmetric, was the war between David and Goliath. Goliath was using something which was equivalent of F-35 at his time, and David was using something which is equivalent of a small drone. The history repeats itself. And, but I will heavily use the term foreign influence because we in Bulgaria, and I'm sure that my compatriot Vessela will support me in this, she knows the things. We in Bulgaria have approximately 1,000 fake news or disinformation or whatever you call it per day. 1,000 penetrations of Bulgarian cognitive space per day from Russia. I do not speak about China at this moment. People say, well, we have to educate the population, but it is not possible to educate population to self-defense from 1,000 units per day. This is like to educate the people to fly an airplane. As a result of this Russian intervention, we have at this moment in Bulgaria 3 parliamentary groups which are reporting to Putin. We have similar parliamentary groups in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Slovakia, etc., etc., etc. If Putin has majority in our parliament, he doesn't need weapons, he doesn't need nuclear weapons, he doesn't need tanks, he doesn't need anything. He has the parliament from inside. So our major target would be not to permit Nigel Farage to become Prime Minister of the UK. It is much more important than the nuclear deterrence which the UK can provide to the rest of Europe. What is our solution? My organization, the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria, has proposed a solution, and we, together with the Minister of Foreign Defense of Bulgaria and the Parliament of Bulgaria, proposed this to the NATO summit. This is a solution which we call de-brainwashing. De-brainwashing is a simple algorithm, very simple to formulate, but very difficult and resource-consuming to implement. This is an algorithm which can fight foreign propaganda in an effective way. My original profession are algorithms. If someone is interested, I'll be ready to discuss the algorithm after that with him or her. And now I would like, with this relatively short introduction, to pass the word to Alina Bârgăoanu, a Romanian communication scholar with long interest in studying and tackling disinformation, cognitive warfare, cyber-enabled influence campaigns, and member of the advisory board of the European Digital Media Observatory. After what happened in Romania and Moldova recently, she would be most appreciated speaker. Alina, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. As an expert, as a Romanian expert, of course, Romanian experts probably are very sought after the annulled Romanian elections. Thank you for the introduction. Let me react very quickly to what you said. I completely agree that probably the word hybrid creates some complications. Warfares are hybrid, so the notion of hybrid warfare is almost tautological in nature. Leaving that quick reaction aside, I will make some general statements about what I call information and cognitive warfare. Then I will make some short references to Romania, then some short references to the Republic of Moldova, and draw some conclusions, and I promise I will do it in 6 minutes. First of all, about contemporary information and cognitive warfare. In my understanding, this type of warfare is together with other tactics below the threshold of war, part of the geopolitical influence war. So I think that this is the framing to which I'm ascribing to, that cognitive warfare, information warfare is part of the current geopolitical influence war. And this type of new war, I will come back to the word new, it uses simultaneously or separately different tactics, such as disinformation, propaganda, hostile influence campaigns, political and electoral interference, cyber attacks, cyber intelligence, cartographic warfare, data and information harvesting, weaponization of diasporas, weaponization of migration flows. So I'm making the point just by naming these tactics that it is a new type of warfare that targets the cognitive domain and which seeks to weaponize an information environment which is hyper-connected and which is very, very open. I listened very carefully to the discussion about the Dayton Accords, and of course it is not very wise to judge counterfactually, but I'm wondering, just as an intellectual exercise, whether these accords would have been possible in the first place under the conditions of the current information environment, which is weaponized against itself, which is full of hostile influence campaigns, inauthentic behavior, major state and non-state actors inserting into that globalized public space. So in my understanding, we are dealing with a completely new environment, which again weaponizes the very connectivity and the very openness of democratic societies. The second general point that I would make is that there are some shortcomings of the discourse on information and cognitive warfare. It focuses on disinformation and propaganda at the expense of the more sophisticated tactics, which are technological in nature. It suffers from the information and solution bias, hoping that with the right information, the society will somehow move to a more informed phase. And it works in silos, whereas the phenomena is cross-institutional, is cross-disciplinary, and it is definitely cross-country. And it suffers from the idea that in the end, that kind of cognitive warfare is a lesser form of warfare. It is an easier form of warfare, which somehow drains our resources from more serious work. The case of Romania is, in my understanding, is the perfect embodiment of these shortcomings of the discourse on cognitive and information warfare. In my understanding, this is why I think that the annulled elections of Romania have an implication for Romania, of course, but for any other NATO country or for any democracy for that matter. In my understanding, the annulled presidential elections in Romania were a complex combination between foreign interference and local interference, the digital echoes, one part reinforcing the other. And what happened in Romania in December 2024 was a culmination of a long-term influence campaign that sought to inject narratives into the public space, to create prepositioned communities, to create networks, very resilient networks for that matter, that under the right political and social circumstances distorted the public discourse through low visibility and below radar channels. I'm not trying to find excuses for the Romanian institutions in charge with the subject, but according to my observations, it is true that the long-term influence campaign was low visibility and it was below radar, because this is how the information environment functions in the first place, with low visibility and below radar on our WhatsApp phones, for example. About the Republic of Moldova, I'm not from the Republic of Moldova, and you need a lot of cultural context in order to understand what is happening there. I would make 2 points that are hopefully relevant for our discussion. First of all, I think that the success in withstanding Russian cognitive warfare in the Republic of Moldova is an instance of a whole-of-government approach. When talking about mitigating cognitive and information warfare, we talk a lot about whole-of-society approach, but we forget that essential part that the institutions need to be aligned in the first place. So this will be my first point about the Republic of Moldova. And the second point about the Republic of Moldova and also about the renewed elections in May in Romania is that we shouldn't draw too optimistic conclusions from the results of elections, hoping that somehow the information warfare has ended with a good result of the elections. And in the case of the Republic of Moldova, in the case of all the topics that were discussed right now, I think that the major vehicle for cognitive and information warfare is what it is called enlargement fatigue. So this is the fertile ground against which all the things that I mentioned could become very, very acute at the right point. Finally, my plea is for cross-disciplinary and cross-institutional and cross-national endeavors in order to fight cognitive warfare. My plea is to come up with integrated top-down network approaches which are definitely cross-national. Fighting cognitive warfare is not a beauty contest. Who is more resilient as opposed to who is less resilient? I think this is one of the mistakes inside the European Union and at the level of NATO. I think that cognitive warfare should not be defined as a big decisive attack, but more so not as a crisis situation, but more as a sustained and cumulative processes that seek to inject certain narratives into the public space, build networks and communities which are very, very resilient in the end. And finally, I think that fighting cognitive warfare should be considered less as a problem of speech, because this creates endless problems about freedom of speech and censorship, and more as a problem of organization and algorithmic affordances.
Thank you, Alina. Speaking of freedom of speech, one cannot say that to propagate that the earth is flat is freedom of speech. This is freedom of stupidity. So we have to be very careful when defending freedom of speech. I was very impressed we all were very impressed by the performance of President Maia Sandu in Moldova recently. And actually, I think that you in Romania did a great job during the previous presidential campaign when you took the right measures on the right time, in the right ways, with the right strength. Congratulations. Now, our next speaker is Edward Joseph. He has very interesting biography. He's a leading American voice on the Balkans, brings rare on-the-ground experience. He served in every conflict on the theater in the region for over than 12 years. This is huge experience, Edward. Congratulations. A landmark moment in his CV is July 1995, during the massacres in Srebrenica, when Edward coordinated the evacuation of women, children, and wounded soldiers. He is a former US Army helicopter pilot. Edward deployed with Nato-Ue shortly after the Dayton Agreement was signed. In May 2012, as deputy head of OSCE mission in Kosovo, he negotiated among the first post-independence agreements with Serbia and Kosovo. He sees the region through the eyes of a practitioner and negotiator, and this influences his remarks today. Welcome, Edward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Passi. Permettimi di dire qualche parola nella bella lingua del paese che ci ospita. Desidero ringraziare l'ambasciatore Minuto-Rizzo per averci riuniti soprattutto in questo momento tumultuoso e per l'invito. Grazie, signore. Okay. And that concludes my presentation. If we could have the slides. So here we go. I have good news for you. I have good news for you because I have answers to those excellent questions. Macedonian ambassador, the Swiss ambassador asked, what can we do about this? What can attract Trump's attention? And I have the answer, if you permit me, I don't know if I can stick to 7 minutes, but I'm going to try. So here you go. You have it, picture right here. You talk about foreign malign influence. Here's a great picture. We have to remember that it's not just coming from the outside, that Serbia is its own platform. It's a platform not just for Russia and pro-Russian narratives and China, the platform for Chinese influence. It's a platform for its own malign influence in the region, and I think that's something most of us can agree. And let me get the slide. Here we go. So what can we do about this? And my approach, by the way, is published in an article today in our journal, my university journal, SAIS Review of International Affairs, is to flip the script here. Instead of seeing the Balkans as this passive recipient constantly of foreign malign influence, what if we could turn the Balkans into an active agent to advance, not to get, but to advance towards a ceasefire in Ukraine? Now, how could we do that? One way is we need to, we need to understand first, quickly, what are the primary obstacles to a ceasefire in Ukraine? Let's remember, this is our priority. First, there's no stasis, there's no freeze on the battlefield. This is a big problem. Russian perceived momentum. We don't have this mutually hurting stalemate. That's number one. We have well-known imbalances. I'm going to speak very fast because we don't have much time. We have Russian aims to affirm sovereignty of the territory it controls and its ambitions for territory beyond that. I have an asterisk because that's not the end of Russian ambitions. They want Ukraine as a puppet state. And the fourth, of course, we have limited Western pressure on Russia. Okay, we can talk about my country, Trump administration, and we have no plan. Carl Bildt spoke about before Dayton, there were several plans. We have no plan for a ceasefire, no really agreed plan. So my approach, my proposal, we take the modified Kosovo agreement, the 1244 UN resolution for Kosovo, and apply it to the Donbass, or whatever are the agreed areas for the ceasefire in Ukraine. 5 key elements here. So first, territory. It will go beyond the current occupied areas, and that will make it attractive to Russia. 2, sovereignty. This is the key point of 1244. We sidestep that. We neither deny nor declare. Kosovo was not declared independent, nor was that a door foreclosed. That's neutral, goes to both. Third, guiding principles. After 1244, the contact group, including Russia, agreed, and the United States, there would be no reversion to the pre-war situation. We will do the same. Ukraine will agree to this, that there will be no reversion, but there will be 3 outcomes, at least there are 3 outcomes. Partition of this, Russian annexation, this will be an agreed potential outcome, and that this territory will remain Ukrainian. So there'll be 3, but those defining those 3 outcomes, formalizing it, that their potential will be attractive to Putin, but how will it be determined? There will be referenda in the future, as was promised under 1244, the will of the people. And the modalities, of course, will kick that down the road. Not everything has to be agreed at once. And as Peter Sorensen mentioned, was the case in Kosovo, there will be third-party administration by UN or OSCE, and you'll see the benefits here. If you go here, so Russia, maximal demands are preserved. We tackle and we get Putin's devotion to 1244 and Kosovo precedent, which he constantly talks about. He will get, in the end, this package will be ratified at the Security Council, something that Russia always wants. For Ukraine, very important and very much overlooked. This will halt the Russification taking place actively every day in these territories occupied by Russia. Ukraine will not be forced to cede sovereignty for all time. There will be referenda. The demographics, unlike in Kosovo, will be very mixed, so that outcome is not foregone, conclusion, as in Kosovo, and there'll be security guarantees that will be discussed. So the requirement to achieve this, there are an array of pressures on Putin to accept this. Of course, that's not enough. The question is, what would be what would be the number one most neuralgic point from the Balkans, most neuralgic point for the Kremlin, for Putin, that we could get from the Balkans, if you think about it? What would that be? I'll give you the answer. Formalized, this would be formalized to the United States, Serbian commitment to join NATO as part of a White House brokered settlement with Kosovo. Yes, Serbia to join NATO, and of course Kosovo also accepts this NATO membership plan. So why is it transformative? Unlike EU membership, membership in NATO is incompatible with Alexander Vucic's multi-vector balance. This ends the fake neutrality. It's intolerable to Russia, largely so to China, but particularly to Russia, and it will severely damage the relationship with Russia, which hinges on Kosovo. We saw how furious Serbs were with some of Putin's remarks. It's incompatible with the Serbian revisionist narrative. NATO bombing is central to that narrative. It means acceptance of the Western order, and that transforms the region. It's incompatible with the isolation of Kosovo. Instead of the non-recognition campaign, this is Belgrade and Pristina agreeing to become allies. It will include, Peter, if Peter were here, he would note this, of course, Kosovo's signature of the statute for the association, the long-sought agreement. Carl Bildt mentioned there's agreements that haven't been, and Peter mentioned, that haven't been agreed yet. And this resolution of Kosovo ends this leverage that Serbia holds. Why would Vucic accept this? Number one, there's 4 reasons, at least,
We
here.
are half minute above the time.
Yes, okay, and I'm going to borrow from our keynote speaker who is so concise. We have the Trump factor. Trump is the most popular in around the world in Serbia, highest popularity anywhere. We saw last week, anyone who thinks this is implausible with Trump, the administration just enforced the sanctions on NIS, the Serbian national oil company, last Thursday, something Belgrade did not want at all. Second, Kosovo's already lost and lost under Vucic's watch. The North, Kurti, what he's done in the North, he's consolidated it. Plus, there's no need for Belgrade to recognize Kosovo now. Kosovo will get in NATO anyway. If Vucic turns it down, Kosovo will get NATO anyway. I deal with the non-recognizers. We start with Greece, which is prepared to recognize Trump, diplomacy, Secretary General Rutte, all can help. None of them need to recognize Kosovo right away for this deal to work. And we have what Vessela mentioned. We have Serbia's domestic crisis. The 1 year approaching, this will upend the situation. It will confound and change the situation. Vucic will control the media narrative. His base is loyal. They will follow what they're told. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Edward. Actually, I cannot agree more with what you said, in particular about Serbia. It is to talk, they open this chapter and close the other chapter is a little bit insane in the contrast, the background of the fact that we have a Russian spy base in Serbia. If they have a Russian spy base in Niš, 120 kilometers to the west of Bulgaria, what chapter to open, what chapter to close? This is insane. And they're going to, they gave or are going to give diplomatic status of the Russian spies in Serbia. So what you said, I think, is absolutely rational, and this should be a decision of the European Union, not of NATO. We should say, we do not invite to the European Union new countries if they're not members of NATO, especially if this happens on the Balkans. Number one. And about Kosovo. We say, well, we have 4 allies in NATO that do not recognize Kosovo. This is their domestic agenda. But having said that, why not we agree with Kosovo that we do not recognize the country, but we defend the territory and we defend the people. Exactly as we can defend the space, the cyberspace and Antarctica, without being countries, we defend the people and we defend the territories. This might be something that work out. Having said that, I'll be very happy to pass the word to Dr. Valery Perry. She worked on the Western Balkans since the late 1990s, conducting research and working for organizations including Democratization Policy Council, the European Center for Minority Issues, Public International Law and Policy Group, S4, OSCE. She has focused on democratic governance, corruption, extremism, democratic threats, and comprehensive security. She has edited 3 books, published numerous articles in books, chapters, has spoken to conferences and policy events in the United States and through Europe, and has testified at the US Congress. Valery, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for that. I just want to note as well that I'm based in Sarajevo. I've been living there for over 20 years, with the exception of about 1.5 years in Serbia. So I pay taxes there, I see what's going on a day-to-day basis, and that really affects my perspective, even though I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. I'm going to take the opportunity of being the last speaker on this panel, and the last speaker before we move towards the wrap-up, to first give a few big picture thoughts on what I've been hearing today. Second, talk a bit about this idea of hybrid operations or influence operations, or I like your term, cognitive warfare. And then also try to give some suggestions about what to do, some specific things that I think could be done if we could only summon up the political will. And the sooner that NATO and EU could do that jointly, the better. One thing that I think that has really been missing in general in discussions about these threats is the idea that the best way to resist hybrid threats and this transactionalism is through a return to comprehensive security. There was a time when we used to believe that the liberal peace, the democratic peace, was the best way to ensure growth, economic development, and the protection of human rights. It's very rare that we hear anyone talking about that. I was glad to hear a few people mention values today, but it's increasingly rare. A second thing I want to note is we've mentioned a few elephants in the room, but I think the biggest elephant in the room is what is NATO without a reliable United States? If you can't rely on the United States as a NATO partner, if the United States' domestic and international posture is eroding to the fact that I don't believe we can trust in Article 5, what does that look like? What does the transatlantic relationship look like in the absence of the United States? And are we prepared to have that conversation? Next, there were a few comments earlier about, gee, we just wish that the politicians in the region would work harder and do something. That's assuming that they want to. That's assuming that they think that they can get a better deal within the European Union and within NATO than what they already have. And this shows that there's really still a fundamental misunderstanding of the political economy in the region. And there's a misunderstanding of the fact that corruption and state capture are security threats. They're not just deviations, they're not just innocent bribes. They are security threats, and much has been written about that. And then also, I was glad to hear the word resilience earlier. And I would just like to sort of note that I think people in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans, are very resilient because they've learned how to survive through 30+ years of bad governance, war, things not working, the water being turned off. They're super resilient. The issue is that there's a positive resilience and a negative resilience. And we need to make sure that any work being done by NATO, by the NATO Euro-Atlantic relationship, supports a more positive resilience that returns dignity and power to people. Very briefly, in terms of the issue of influence operations, special measures, active measures, or cognitive warfare. I think that we can't be discounting the issue of disinformation and the fact that this is key in trying to undercut the idea that things can be better. What we're seeing right now in terms of all of the messaging coming into the countries in the region and beyond is trying to sow more and more distrust, trying to make it seem that it's impossible to move forward. I was glad to hear earlier in the first panel that someone mentioned the whole fact that after Maidan, Moscow needed to make sure that Ukraine did not demonstrate a different future, because if Ukraine was able to move to the West, people in Russia would start saying, well, what about us? And you can start to see similar dynamics, I think, in the Western Balkans as well. And there are different ways that we can talk about how to do this in terms of both the supply of information and the demand or the consumption. I would also want to mention that thinking about how to deal with the threats right now when it seems that the liberal West is really lacking confidence and lacking vision is to recognize that if there is a race to the bottom, the West will lose. Okay, the best competitive advantage that the European Union, that the NATO alliance, with or without the United States, has is precisely in its values. There's a reason that we don't see people in Sarajevo lining up for visas to go to Russia or China. They're lining up to go to Europe because that's where they want their children to live. So I sometimes worry that Europe thinks that they need to move a little bit to the right for domestic consumption or elsewhere. But the only advantage that they really have in terms of selling a vision based on comprehensive security has to be grounded in their values. The Chinese can build infrastructure faster because they're willing to cut corners and make the deals needed. But that is going to hurt the societies that we see. In terms of what to do, I mean, the first thing is I really think that, again, there needs to be a fundamental rethink about the role of the political economy that is based on corruption and that has really embedded itself and calcified in important ways over the past 15, 20, 25 years. And this is a conversation that's difficult because the EU and NATO, diplomats in general, they like to deal with elites. They like to pretend that the elites in the room are their partners and their buddies, and that's why they always go and meet with them. But again, they don't share the same vision and values. And I think that what we've been seeing in Serbia has been a tremendous missed opportunity because the people of Serbia at great personal risk have gone out on the street to demonstrate the values and the future they want. And unfortunately, the European Union in particular has been quite silent on this. They have not been greeting them with the open arms that many young people in Serbia expected. A very specific way that we can take the whole of society or the whole of institution approach to the region in terms of development and preparing the region for an EU future, hopefully, would be a complete rethink of how the issue of critical raw materials is being dealt with in the Western Balkans. Right now, what we're seeing is that if you talk to anyone from the West, they say, well, hey, if we don't go and get the lithium, if we don't go and get the nickel, China will. Well, there's another option. There's a way to go in and do this. There's a way to go to Serbia. There's a way to go to Bosnia to get and work with these minerals without exploiting people with a new form of colonialism. But nobody wants to talk about that. There's a way that these minerals could be unearthed in a way that's consultative with the communities affected, actually look at the environment in a meaningful way, and perhaps most importantly, support education and economic development by making sure that everything is not just being trucked out to Switzerland, Germany, and beyond, but is actually being processed in countries in a region that actually have a very strong history of industrial engineering and processing. Many people will say this is unrealistic, we need to do it because we need to take jobs back to Germany. If that's our thought, then we've already lost the battle. This is an opportunity to really go in and give people the dignity of work, the dignity of participation, and the dignity of trying to rebuild their countries. And I would just close by saying that, again, while it can seem like the West is losing right now, it seems that anti-democratic, autocratic leaders throughout the world are really coordinating, are really messaging, are really working together, and they are. And so I guess the question is that why isn't the democratic alternative doing the same? Why isn't there the same urgency in terms of the values and the narrative? And what's preventing that from happening? Returning the discussion to comprehensive security can help us to recognize that this is not just some hippie pipe dream, but is actually related to making sure that we can be secure again for the decades to come.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Thank you. Yes, I agree that about the mining stuff. We have Bulgarian mining companies which have a strong presence in the region. I agree with you. And imagine you have a magic stick to impose your own will over NATO and the European Union. What solution would you implement? What execution order would you sign?
execution order could really be defined after some of the frustrating times we've had. But no, I really do think that increasingly this issue of critical strategic raw materials is important. And one thing that could be immediately done would be for the European Union to note that none of its companies are going to come into the region without adhering to the same standards they would be adhering to if they were in Salzburg or in Stockholm. That they would not be seeking to sort of curtail public consultation in a meaningful way, or a lot of the huge lapses of transparency we see, where even independent journalists who are trying to investigate these things are being thwarted and not really getting any support from the liberal West. And so, I mean, this again, it would be a way to say, all right, we are so serious about thinking that someday you're going to be a member of the European Union, that we're going to start working with you on this important issue using European Union standards and expectations now. We're not going to wait.
Thank you. Q&A session. Q&A session. One question or a statement. Number two. Third hand, do I see? Not for the moment. Please, you have the floor. And number three.
I really don't want to occupy the space and time. I used one question earlier, but having here, that was one of the reasons why I came to this conference today. Of course, what Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo is doing every year is phenomenal, to tell you the truth. But when I saw that Ed is there and Carl Bildt is there, I said, I am not going to miss this one. I'm fascinated that Western Balkans can be an example of how to solve the Ukraine and Russian war. And I'm absolutely fascinated in what in 7 minutes Ed just presented, which is incredible. But I wanted to ask Edward just one more element, if possible, to add into that model of yours that you just proposed. If these elements that you mentioned are not sufficient enough to persuade Putin or anybody else for that matter, do you believe, because since we all talking about the big elephant, and Carl Bildt presented the big elephant here, and that is the economy, talking about minerals, talking about economy, talking about minerals, that Bulgaria is ready to join there, you know, to do mining there. Do you believe that space as an attraction force is a necessary element to add to this model in order to persuade Russia, let's bring us all together and do minerals and mining in space, and probably this attraction force of space would be sufficient element to persuade Russia, okay, forget about Ukraine, the minerals that are there are not enough in comparison to minerals that we have in space. So let's work all together to move and find minerals in outer space.
This topic is very dear to my heart because I'm running a national space festival for kids, and one of the topics is mining in space. So I'll invite you to discuss. Number two, the lady, please.
Hello, my name is Alexandra. I'm a student from Poland at Sapienza University. And I have a question regarding whether it is really possible to encourage Vučić to join NATO, taking into consideration like the closeness of Serbia and Russia, especially cultural and political. For example, the inspiration in Srpski svet and by Ruski Mir, or also a lot of Russian investigation in Serbia, more than $1 billion, and the huge popularity of Putin in the society, and the religion, Orthodox religion, and a huge amount of Russian immigrants that came especially after, not especially, but a lot of them immigrated after the start of the war in Ukraine. So it seems like they are very close to each other. So it's very hard to suddenly convince them to become a Western ally if the culture, Serbian culture, is so close to Russia since ages.
Well, we were talking about membership of Serbia in NATO, not of Vučić or Milosevic. question for the last row, and after that you.
I'm Dragana Broza. I'm a university professor here in Rome. My question is more to the problems of information and disinformation. And the question is how to protect the open platforms that are using all disinformation or misleading information, passing it through Meta into the world of artificial intelligence and mass use of responses at the artificial intelligence that are created based on disinformation.
Okay, and the gentleman.
Almost same question. My name is Ciro Maddaloni, and I would like to understand why, for example, NATO and the organization, international organization, do not invest anything in information. Information is important. You gave us a slide at the beginning that is very interesting. I didn't know that slide. The one with all the countries that Russia has tried to aggress in the last 100 years. So I think that we can invest money in making exactly what Russia is doing nowadays in disinformation and creating bots and creating waves of fake information on Facebook and things like that. Because today the people don't have the time to read or to study or even don't know anything. They just inform themselves on Facebook, they inform themselves on Instagram. And this is why then we have this waves of fake information, as you were saying before, no? This way of let's say, influencing the people on what to think or what to believe, even if it's wrong.
As a part of the answer to your question, what we suggested to NATO is to invoke Article 5 on 24/7 basis permanently against propaganda. Article 5 says that armed attack against one is attack against all. But Article 5 does not define what is the arm. It could be bullet, it could be nuclear thing, it could be a word. The word can kill many more people than a bullet. We need it, and in addition to that, we need a NATO anti-propaganda command which to execute the permanent invocation of Article 5. Having said that, I'm giving the floor in the opposite order to our panelists to answer your questions, starting from Valery.
Sure. First, I'm glad that the woman from Poland, I think it was, raised the issue of Serbski Svet and Ruski Mir, because they are obviously very closely interrelated, and it's actually shocking how little we hear about that connection from diplomats from the European Union space or Europe plus in general. There's almost a willful desire to pretend that these things aren't connected in terms of an ideological underpinning, and I think that is quite dangerous. In terms of thinking about a NATO future for Serbia, I don't think it's impossible, in part because, I mean, look through history. I mean, while Russia will talk about this wonderful history of Slavic brotherhood, they've also never missed an opportunity to stab Serbia in the back when it suited them. In terms of some of the disinformation questions, I think it's interesting because in terms of the platforms and the supply, it's stunning for me to think that we have forgotten that there can be any sense of just thoughtful moderation. I mean, I did not want to see the assassination of a young man on my feed, but somehow I had to. And it got me thinking back in 2013, 14, when the social media platforms were basically told that they needed to get ISIS propaganda and beheadings off the platforms. They did it. They did it quickly. And so again, I'm not saying that we need to have some sort of a complete censorship board, but it's clear that when there's the will to try to stop some of this, it can be done. What worries me is that the conversations aren't happening. In terms of AI, I think it's going to be even worse because nobody's really having a thoughtful conversation of what this can be. The companies certainly aren't. And they're basically selling lies and promises because they want to make money as quickly as possible. Sometimes I get a bit nihilistic in thinking maybe the best we can hope for is that so much AI slop is going to be generated that people will start ignoring most of it, if not all of it, and finding a way to think about what a trusted news source is, which really requires a bottom-up effort as well. And I completely agree in terms of NATO investing in information, and the fact that they haven't done so yet in terms of itself and cooperating with, whether it be the EU or others, is troubling.
We have just discussed with Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo that we have to undertake some action before NATO in order to resume, not only to increase, to resume the activities of public diplomacy department and the whole anti-propaganda policy. You, Alina?
Building on what you said, the toolkit for fighting the cognitive warfare is there. I mean, it's known. It's known by many people. It's known by thousands of experts in the United States and in the European Union. So this is not a mystery. The problem is that this toolkit has not been turned into a policy, and it is not funded. And I think that the fight against disinformation, propaganda, information warfare is still a footnote to what it is considered to be more serious discussions. I think this is the biggest difficulty in fighting this, only to have to contemplate the phenomena, to detect the phenomena, but then not to take robust action. And again, the toolkit is there: legislative measures, non-legislative measures, fact-checking, empowering users, doing content moderation, empowering journalists, taking down content. So again, the toolkit is there and it is very, very well known. The problem is that out of this toolkit, people started to, the decision makers started to do cherry picking. Okay, so I will invest in some fact-checking because this is not very controversial. Or okay, I will do some content moderation because that was the fashionable thing to do in 2018, for example. But I think that kind of cherry picking was very, very dangerous. First of all, because it didn't solve the problem. And second, it provided some sort of security that at least we are doing something, and we were always on the defensive. Why it doesn't work? So cherry picking definitely doesn't work. And as the famous title of the Hollywood movie said, you have to do everything, everywhere, and all at once. And before investing in strategic communication, probably that was the message, I think that we have to clear the communication field and to take down the malign influence. Because if we only add strategic communication to an information environment which is already overcrowded, we will only add to the problem. So again, I think that cherry picking is very dangerous because, among other things, it creates a false sense of security. And another elephant in the room is the technological sovereignty of the European Union, and the fact that the things that we are describing here in our conference, many things are hosted on the digital platforms without no vigorous action. And without that kind of digital sovereignty, the European Union will always be on a defensive footage, and we always complain about different influence campaigns coming from different geographical points.
What your remark on the defense is very much in synergy with what President Trump said today in Jerusalem, how and why he changed the name of the Ministry of Defense into Ministry of War. If I'm, however, to give advice to my government, I would advise to change the name of our ministry into Ministry of Victory, because this is more or less for the size of Bulgaria. Well, we have... Oh, yes. I'm very sorry. One minute more for you.
Thank you, if you permit me, but I like Ministry of Victory, Dr. Pazzi. I think that's great. Two questions from the Macedonian ambassador and someone from Poland who asked also both excellent questions. And thank you for the kind words, Mr. Ambassador. The Trump space and so forth, yes, that would certainly appeal to Donald Trump, and that would appeal to his instincts. In the meantime, we have the war raging, and that's our priority. Our priority is to achieve a ceasefire now. And Trump made his stab in Alaska. We don't have time to get into that, but it at least elicited that territory is part of this equation. It's not Putin's ultimate aim, let's be clear, but it's part of the equation and can be a step. And again, as with Kosovo, 1244 can be an interim step. And I'd emphasize here that there are very good reasons for Trump to take this approach. The expansion of NATO in the Balkans is essentially risk-free. So he doesn't get risk. There are Republicans in Congress that advocate this. They include the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, very conservative Republican, advocates Kosovo and NATO and points out the relationship with Russia. So there are very good reasons, and it does provide this impact. And we should understand here, for Vladimir Putin, he's cynical, yes, but there is a deep emotional investment in this Serbia-Kosovo issue, similar to his statement that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe in history. It's emotional. He sees the 1999 NATO bombing. This is the quintessence of this abuse of a weak Russia by this hypocritical Western Bloc there, and it's so-called, as they call it, so-called rules-based order. So a flip from Serbia, I believe, would have a significant, it's geopolitical, and I would also say even psychological. It's an equivalent of the sinking of the Moskva. Serbia saying it will join NATO is the Balkans equivalent of the sinking of the Moskva. Not going to be the only step, because of course what really counts are weapons to Ukraine, Tomahawks, expanded intelligence, and allowing Ukraine to do deeper strikes. So we know all that, but this is a safe way for Trump to move forward for the reasons I mentioned. And why would Vučić accept this? I totally agree that this cultural element has been exaggerated. Of course, you go anywhere in Serbia today, you say, do you want to join NATO? Everyone is going to, almost everyone, they'll say no. But they're told to say no. And they're told, they've been dealt this grievance about NATO bombing it consistently in the media, 90% of which Vučić has dominant influence over. And they've been told that, and that will change. I would not underestimate, here, we just heard Dr. Pasi quote Trump in Jerusalem. I would not underestimate the Trump factor here. Trump got Netanyahu to do this deal, okay? I don't think Alexander Vučić is Benjamin Netanyahu in terms of relative ability to withstand pressure. And the second point I would point out, a note here under my approach, remember, this is Serbia, this is offered to Serbia and Kosovo. And again, I won't get into it, but anyone who doubts that we can deal with the non-recognizers, trust me, Greece will go immediately with this because the statute will be signed for the association, and that will be the clincher. Greece they've crossed the bridge with Cyprus. It's no longer an issue for Athens, formally. There. So, and once you get Greece, then, come on, the door's open with Romania and Slovakia, and then Spain would be isolated and would be difficult, and they don't need to recognize just to make this offer, which itself would be transformative. And once, again, if Vučić says no, remember Kosovo has its path. Once Kosovo has a path, this is in another report done on SICE, From Crisis to Convergence. Once Kosovo has its path, Serbia's leverage over Kosovo is over. The non-recognition campaign means nothing. It's finished. All Kosovo needs is a pathway. Doesn't even need membership. It needs a pathway, unobstructed pathway, and then Serbia's leverage is gone. And again, Vučić gets things domestically. He can say, look, I got the association. No one before me could get it. So he has his advantages. And Ambassador, let me quickly take the opportunity to thank our mutual friend at NATO, Silvia Moretti, for introducing us. I wanted to just slip that in. Thank you.
I joined the thanks to Silvia Moretti.
That's great.
From PDD.
Well, we almost have no time for more questions, but if there is one very burning question, no very burning questions, one very burning question.
For you, Professor Joseph, in few terms, what will be the need for Serbia to join NATO? I don't understand. What Serbia will gain joining NATO right now? Huh?
Yes, what Serbia will gain is they will gain first the stability that comes with NATO membership. So you talk about investment, stability. There is benefits for Vučić for the balance, but there are also tremendous benefits to a commitment to finally set its strategic orientation. Let's remember, 2/3 of Serbian trade is with the EU. Yes.
It's more convenient to join EU than NATO.
Yes, but Serbia is already, but makes no progress on its EU. And let me quickly jump in here because one of the previous guests mentioned about Montenegro and that this currently will be some encouragement, au contraire, if you're from the region, obrutno. At present, Serbia under Vučić is concerned about and doesn't want Montenegro to join the EU. And that's why its confederates in Podgorica, in the government, are doing sabotage now, publicly talking, yes, we want EU, and then privately doing significant damage to the state of Montenegro. And that's very similar, of course, to another country, Russia, towards Ukraine. This is the fear. So there's a fear factor. We're removing all that. Now, so it's not, now, if you ask Alexander Vučić, or you ask him, do you want to join NATO? He's going to tell you no. But let's also remember that there are Serbs who understand strategically what NATO means for Serbia. And guess who one of them is? Does anyone know? One of those prominent Serbs who understands strategically what NATO means for Serbia? His name is Dragan Šutanovac. Does anyone know who Dragan Šutanovac is? He's the Serbian ambassador to the United States, recently appointed by Alexander Vučić. And watch what he said. He makes strategic case for this. He says, quote, this is Šutanovac, and I met with him, and he doesn't walk it back. It's not what he's talking about. He's trying with strategic dialogue with the United States. He has other priorities. But you see, even recently, he in the past years, he has said Serbia should accept reality, and joining NATO will be a dramatic economic and security boost to the country. So they have, and their military wants it, by the way. You want other practical reasons? Why do they want it? Ask privately, ask any Serbian general, do you want to join NATO? And if Serbia has an enormous munitions industry, this will expand their profile for exporting munitions and armaments. They'll develop their own armaments industry. And this would all be part of the deal with the United States, with Trump. Defense cooperation, advanced defense cooperation. So there's a lot positive in there if Trump will tell Vučić, just like he told Netanyahu, do the deal. You do the deal. Quickly, I agree with Valery about the lithium and the minerals, and I wrote an article during the NATO PA in Dayton. Totally agree. Trump should do a minerals deal in Bosnia-Herzegovina that is different from the EU strategic minerals deal with Belgrade. And totally, the Trump deal should include meaningful citizen oversight, because the EU's deal with Serbia has gone nowhere, absolutely nowhere. They are no closer in Serbia, to getting one little amount of yadarite, anything. They're no closer. It's completely dead, and with the protests, even deader. And Trump can learn for that, have his own deal with citizen oversight in BIH.
I just have to respond. I cannot imagine a Trump brokered deal on critical raw materials meeting the standards and having the citizen participation that I think would be necessary to consolidate liberal democracy. He's getting rid of watchdog protections back home. Why would he want to support them in the Western Balkans?
Well, we can continue this in the couloirs.
Yes, yes.
This is a fantastic topic.
Yes, Trump, you have to remember, Trump has, he has already made so many reversals. And his foreign policy has changed. His Gaza deal, look at the 20 points of the Gaza deal. This is infinitely, sorry. Come on, for BIH, this is nothing. Infinitely more significant than what he would do in BIH, and it's totally plausible. If there were financial interest for the United States that he can sell, he can agree to, if that's the deal clincher, he can get it.
Minister Andrea Romussi is expecting us. I want to invite him to here on the podium. Alessandro.
Well, thank you very much, Solomon, first of you, for your moderation, and to the speakers. It has been a very, very interesting conversation, a lively one, I would say. Thank you. Now, the final remarks will be given by Minister Andrea Romussi, a very distinguished diplomat. He is the director for NATO and Security Strategic Affairs, a long list of competencies. I don't want to go through all of them. And he's the one who will close this conference. Andrea, you have the floor.
So thanks to you, Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo, and to your team at the Nato Defense College Foundation for the terrific job you are doing in promoting discussions on topics which are very high on the transatlantic agenda. Authorities, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Western Balkans and the Black Sea region, and I quote from para 45 of the last strategic concept, are of strategic importance for the alliance. We will continue to support the euro-atlantic aspiration of interested countries in the regions. We will enhance efforts to bolster their capability to address the distinct threats and challenges they face and boost their resilience against malign third-party interference and coercion. End of quote. So during today's conference, we listened to a great deal of analysis and way ahead proposed. We at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs fully value the contribution of scholars and practitioners. Here are some highlights. The region continues to be affected by various tensions undermining its stability. Ongoing difficulties in dialogues are slowing down reconciliations and regional integration processes, as well as the European perspective. Italy remains actively engaged in the region, strongly supporting its EU accession path, and from a security standpoint, our country provides a key contribution through several military missions, first and foremost KFOR, where Italy is the leading country by number of personnel and has held command 14 times since 1999. Italy also holds the command of EULEX mission in Kosovo and is ready to assume the command of the EUFOR Althea mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2026. Starting from this very country, we have seen that nearly 3 decades after the signing of the Daytona peace agreement, BIH continues to be marked by internal division along ethnic lines among the constituent peoples. The country is highly decentralized, with most competencies assigned to the 2 entities. And it remains under the authority of the High Representative, endowed with executive powers, the bomb powers that override those of the Bosnian authorities. So the country is currently facing a serious crisis that has paralyzed its institution and triggered intense political confrontations. The judicial authorities, we all know that, have initiated proceedings against the President of Republika Ska Dodik for failing to comply with certain decisions of the High Representative Schmidt. The first instance conviction provoked a strong reaction from the authority in Banja Luka, who adopted measures to reject and boycott, actually, the institutional framework established by the 1995 Dayton Agreement.
So the ruling became final and Dodik was officially removed from office. So presidential elections are scheduled now for 23rd November 2025. So in recent days, however, encouraging signals have emerged from the Republika Srpska authority, and Dodik himself was implicitly accepted his removal from the presidency. It also appears likely that he will abandon the planned referendum on the Central Election Commission's decision. So these signs of de-escalation have allowed the tripartite authority to approve the reform agenda, a necessary step for Sarajevo to access the benefits envisaged under the EU Western Balkan Growth Plan. So Bosnia and Herzegovina was until now the only Western Balkans country that had not yet submitted its agenda to the Commission. So for Serbia, Kosovo, Italy within the EU and NATO pay special attention to the development of the EU-promoted Belgrade-Pristina facilitated dialogue, a process that NATO steadfastly supports, but unfortunately is not advancing at the desired pace. We heard just now the main reasons. So the process of normalizing relations between Serbia and Kosovo is a cornerstone for the stability of the entire Balkan region. It is also an indispensable condition for the EU integration prospects of both countries, closely linked to the Brussels and Ohrid agreements of 2023. Yet, neither party has taken any step forward their full implementation. A new momentum to the EU-led dialogue and to the implementation of the related agreement is thus needed. We think that both parties should adopt a concrete and pragmatic approach based on compromise, setting aside ideological stances. So KFOR role is to maintain a stable and secure environment that promotes peaceful inter-ethnic coexistence and a more fruitful political engagement between Pristina and Belgrade. So North Macedonia, the current government in office since 2024, we know has created some friction with Bulgaria and Greece over the country's constitutional name issue. So the Prime Minister maintains an ambiguous stance on these matters affecting relations with neighboring countries and consequently North Macedonia EU accession path. While tensions with Athens over the name dispute have eased, relations with Sofia remain strained due to a long-standing controversies related to minority rights, historical dispute and national identity. As far as Montenegro is concerned, the summer 2024 government reshuffle, which brought the Bosniak Party and pro-Serbian minority coalition parties into the executive, has so far not derailed the country's EU integration path, which continues with determination. Several issues remain unresolved, though. In December 2024, Zagreb vetoed the opening of EU accession negotiations with Montenegro on Chapter 31, the so-called Common and Foreign Security Policy. Recently, however, both countries have shown a constructive approach, initiating technical consultation last January. Lastly, we have Albania. The legislative election of last May resulted in a clear victory of the Socialist Party of Prime Minister Rama, which obtained over 52% of the national vote, a strong increase from the previous 2021 election. So Rama thus secured his fourth consecutive term as Prime Minister. A new government, which includes numerous changes from the previous cabinet, took office on 19 September. So these are our recent evaluation of the situation, the facts, but let's see some insight that we have on the process. At the symposium on partnership in the age of hybrid challenges held last autumn in Sarajevo, it emerged clear the importance of partnership for the euro-atlantic security in a historic phase characterized by persistent, simultaneous and cross-boundary challenges. To track them timely and face them, we should invest in the resilience of these countries, promoting a vigilant approach to security and adopting eventually a more agile decision-making process. Today's challenges require a whole-of-society approach that can manage conflicts in all their dimensions, including the informational cognitive one. Armies win battles, countries win wars. At NATO, there is a strategic reflection on our ability to decipher, contain, and where necessary, counter events of hybrid nature. Our aim is to increase the opportunity cost of any potential hybrid Russian campaigns, more or less directly controlled, by raising the price of our response using asymmetric tools if necessary, for example, focusing on the shadow fleet, and capable of pushing the Russian to recalibrate their risk calculation. As we know, reforms and good neighbors relations are key. But if we really are to succeed in pushing the Euro-Atlantic integration process and complete it someday, we must offer a clearly better perspective than our strategic competitors. I do not nurture any doubt about it. The problem is also the packaging, the advertising, and the condition linked to such an outcome. NATO, EU, and the Western democracies in general are high standard clubs, joinable only through sacrifices, hard work, and reforms on a generational scale, hardly compatible with strong nationalistic agendas. I see a trend of growing awareness occurring at all levels at NATO. Security in all its aspects cannot be taken for granted, and it does have a cost. So increasing effort are being made to reinforce our internal security as well as through partnership. Italy is a strong advocate for a 360-degree approach when it comes to the Euro-Atlantic security. The Western Balkans are one of the main theaters where hybrid competition is taking place today. Hybrid warfare is also occurring in many southern Mediterranean partners. I am thinking, for instance, about Libya here, but not only. The Sahel region, too, is being affected by the malignant action of our strategic competitors. So all this is to say that allied and partners together can push the Euro-Atlantic integration, an intensified outreach is needed, as well as stronger measures to reinforce those societies' resilience, paired with a renewed commitment for sound and effective reforms from these region's countries. So, finally, we think that we should keep our democratic standard bar high. Lowering it would not serve our long-term interest. In the short, medium term, we too, as Euro-Atlantic family, should work towards not only a stronger and more capable deterrence and defense, but to reinforce our resilience vis-à-vis the multifaceted threats originating from our strategic competitors. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I think this is the end of our day. I hope you enjoyed the conference. I did. I learned a lot of new things that I didn't know before, and most of the discussion has been really very interesting. So thank you, everybody. Grazie mille a tutti. Buona serata. Arrivederci.